The damp autumn air hung thick with the promise of an oncoming storm, and even from the battlements of Storm's End, Robert Baratheon could sense the sea's restlessness in every gust of wind. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries swallowed by the crash of waves against the rocks below. He stood silent, hands gripping the cold stone, his broad shoulders tense. A man of formidable build, Robert was admired for his strength and presence. Few could match him in either. Yet this evening, his thoughts were as restless as the ocean. It was not the weather that troubled him. Storms were so familiar to him, they were nearly comforting. No, it was the summons from King's Landing. He was to ride south in a fortnight and meet with the Targaryens, the ancient dragon lords who still claimed dominion over the Seven Kingdoms. Word had come that King Aerys, in one of his fleeting periods of clarity, wanted to discuss an arrangement with House Baratheon. Something about unifying houses through an alliance. Some whispered talk of forging a new era. If Robert scoffed at the idea initially, he had not dared do so in front of the Raven's messengers. The letter itself, sealed with the three-headed dragon, was penned in a fluid hand that bore none of the king's usual ravings. Rhaegar Targaryen, crown prince of the realm, had likely dictated its content. Robert believed that if there was sense to be found in that family, it was with Rhaegar. Certainly not with the Mad King. He ran his thumb over a fine crack in the stone ledge. Unification. A dragon pact, they called it. He remembered reading those words on the parchment and feeling a stir of cautious excitement. If truth be told, the Targaryens were not the unassailable force they had once been. There was a sense of fragility in King's Landing these days, a sense that the dragon's power was waning. Robert, by contrast, felt his power growing. The Stormlands were strong under his leadership, and rumor had it that in the north, Eddard Stark stood ready to support Robert in any conflict. The Tullys, the Arryns, even some of the Tyrells, there was a sense in the air that a new age might be dawning, and that the rule of Aerys II Targaryen had passed its zenith. But for now, the summons was official, diplomatic. There was no mention of open rebellion or war, just a chance to speak of an alliance, a bridging of differences, the forging of something that might prevent a bloody future. It was nearly dusk when he finally left the battlements. The great hall of Storm's End was lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. There, in the flickering light, his foster father, Jon Arryn, was waiting, stoic as ever. Jon's gray hair was cropped short, and his eyes gleamed with quiet wisdom. "Robert," he said in that measured tone, "the men are assembled. They await your address." "I know," Robert answered, glancing around at the hall. He took a steadying breath, then walked toward the open doors. Within, a gathering of knights, bannermen, and trusted retainers waited, all turning as he entered. The hush that fell spoke volumes of the respect they held for him. His presence was magnetic, a blend of confidence and brimming energy that made him larger than life. He looked at them one by one, acknowledging their loyalty. These were men who would follow him through fire and darkness if he asked. Part of him burned to fight, to test his mettle, to rally them as warriors. But now, that letter called him south, not as a conqueror, but as a negotiator. It felt strange on his tongue to speak of peace with the Targaryens. "All of you know why I've called you here," Robert said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We have word from King's Landing. There are new overtures. The Crown requests my presence to discuss a formal alliance." Then, at that, a faint rumble of surprise passed through them. Some exchanged glances. Others looked wary. "You are my sworn men," Robert continued, "and I would be a fool not to heed your counsel. Aerys Targaryen," he paused, his mouth tightening around the name, "is not a man known for reason. Yet Prince Rhaegar, perhaps the sense in that family resides in the prince." Sir Courtney Penrose, always quick to voice concern, frowned deeply. "But my lord, the Targaryens have been sitting that throne for centuries. Why speak of forging alliances now? They didn't need our friendship before." "They'd say." "That's what I intend to learn," Robert said. "I won't go alone. I'll bring a modest company, enough to show we are no meek travelers. but not so many that we seem to march on King's Landing with ill intent, and have the mood be cordial. We can't ignore the gravity of this invitation, even if you suspect a trap." "Ay, my lord," another knight interrupted. "Some might fear it. Aerys might be mad, but not so mad as to risk open strife with the Stormlands without cause," Robert declared. "He can't afford that war. Not now. The realm is uneasy, my friends. There's talk in every corner of discontent with the crown, and if the Targaryens are extending the hand of peace, I must see what that means. All of you know the history of Dragonfire. You know what it can do if unleashed. Let us not rush toward it if it can be avoided." The men seemed to accept this, though some did so grudgingly. Jon Arryn offered Robert a faint nod, evidently in agreement. Robert stepped down from the dais, a swirl of uneasy resolve in his chest. Perhaps this would be the moment to prevent the realm from sliding into chaos. Or perhaps it was but a mirage. He would find out soon enough. Days later, under a steel-gray sky, Robert and his retinue rode forth. The party was small but imposing. A dozen knights bearing the crown stag sigil, a handful of bannermen, and Jon Arryn at his side for guidance. They carried provisions enough to move swiftly, and each man was armed in case of bandits on the road. King's peace or not, travel had its dangers. The clink of armor accompanied them as they left the ancestral fortress behind, passing through farmland and villages that bore the churned remains of recent storms. They pressed on, day after day, as the air shifted from the briny tang of the coast to a milder dryness inland. At night, around the campfires, Robert's men spoke in hushed tones, spinning guesses about what the Targaryens had in mind. Robert listened but offered little comment. He would rather see it for himself than speculate. Jon Arryn, always calm, occasionally leaned over to Robert and whispered, "Remember your courtesy. Remember that you represent your house and the Stormland." Robert would give him a short nod, though in his heart, courtesy had never been his strong suit. He was a warrior at heart, a man of action, not endless politesse. Still, forging a pact required more than a warhammer and a taste for battle. At last, the towers of King's Landing appeared, rising from the horizon like jagged teeth. The Red Keep loomed on the city's eastern edge, perched high on Aegon's Hill. The reek of the poorer quarters reached them even at a distance, a pungent stew of sewage, tanneries, fish markets, and too many people jammed into narrow streets. Robert wrinkled his nose but pressed on. He had been here before, many times in his youth, and memories, some fond, some bitter, surged up as they made their way through the city gates. The gold cloaks, guards of the city, allowed them passage once Robert brandished the Targaryen sealed letter. The group navigated through crowded roads, merchants hawking their wares, beggars calling out for coin, children scurrying alongside horses, hoping for a crumb of bread or a few coppers. The approach to the Red Keep was lined with onlookers. Even in a place as sprawling as King's Landing, the arrival of Robert Baratheon, a prominent lord and rumor churner, drew curious gazes. Whispers passed from mouth to mouth. Did the Lord of Storm's End come in peace, or with a hidden threat? Inside the keep's walls, the air felt heavier. The Targaryen banners hung in deep crimson and black, a reminder of the dynasty's might. Servants directed Robert and his men to stabling areas for the horses, and their weapons were carefully catalogued by the royal guard. Robert handed over his warhammer with only the slightest hesitation. Tradition demanded they come unarmed to an official audience with the king, yet not a single man among them was truly comfortable with that. They were shown to a suite of rooms, austere by royal standards, but comfortable enough, and told that they would be summoned before the king and the royal family in due time. Until then, they were to make themselves at home. Such as it was, Robert dismissed most of his men to rest, but he paced the chamber, restless and full of a cautious energy. Jon Arryn watched him from a seat near the window, silent. The older man knew that Robert's patience was a fragile thing, best not tested. Their wait was not terribly long. As the afternoon sun was tipping west, a knock came. A royal steward entered, all stiff politeness, to announce that His Grace King Aerys II Targaryen desired to greet Lord Robert Baratheon in the throne room, along with Prince Rhaegar. Robert and Jon moved swiftly, leaving behind the rest of their party. Through the corridors of the Red Keep, they went, draped in red tapestries, gilded ornaments, and flickering torches set in iron sconces. Occasionally they passed guards in the Targaryen livery, each offering a tight nod of acknowledgement. Finally, they reached the massive doors to the throne room. The doorward, flanked by 2 knights of the Kingsguard in pale armor, pulled the doors open. Robert drew a breath and entered. The hall was cavernous, the floor a polished marble that reflected torchlight. A carpet of rich red extended all the way to the Iron Throne, that monstrous seat forged from 1,000 melted blades of vanquished enemies. Aerys Targaryen perched upon it, his robes trailing over twisted metal. His silver-gold hair was lank and long, a faint dryness to it that suggested ill health. His eyes glittered like embers, darting from one side of the room to the other. Robert could sense an immediate tension in the king, as though madness lay just beneath the surface. But it was Rhaegar Targaryen who drew Robert's true attention. The prince stood by his father's side, regal and imposing, clad in dark fabric embroidered with the 3-headed dragon. Long silver hair framed a face that was at once handsome and solemn. Rhaegar's eyes were grave, lacking the flickering paranoia in Aerys's gaze. Nearby stood Queen Rhaella, pale and reserved, her expression difficult to read. Beside her, a small cluster of courtiers watched Robert's arrival, doubtless eager to see how this famous lord and the king would greet each other. Robert dipped into a bow, a gesture of courtesy if not warmth. Jon Arryn did the same, albeit with a deeper inclination of his head. "Your Grace," Robert began, his voice resonating in the chamber. "I come as bidden, Robert of House Baratheon, Lord of the Stormlands." Aerys stared down at him for a long moment. Robert held the king's gaze, which was a swirl of caution, cunning, and a feverish light that set Robert's nerves on edge. The Targaryen lineage might have once birthed greatness, but here before him, the monarchy seemed frail. Yet, the threat of dragonfire was never so far away. At length, King Aerys spoke in a voice that quavered, but grew stronger with each word. "Baratheon, yes, yes, we summoned you. At Rhaegar's council, we have called you to King's Landing to discuss matters." His lips curled in an uncertain smile. "Matters of the realm, matters that might bind houses. My dear son thinks it wise to find unity rather than discord in these times." Rhaegar's face flickered with polite acknowledgement. He inclined his head slightly toward Robert. "I am honored, Your Grace," Robert said, careful not to let any hint of sarcasm slip into his tone. "I stand ready to hear your words and to offer mine in turn." "Good, good," Aerys said, a restless shifting of his hands upon the arms of the Iron Throne. "We will speak more intimately in the solar. This hall is too vast for gentle negotiations, though it is the symbol of our might. We shall retire, but we wished first for the realm to see this gesture." He waved a hand at the courtiers gathered, as if to make a spectacle of the moment. "Baratheon stands before us, answering our call, and soon all the 7 kingdoms shall know that House Targaryen and House Baratheon desire peace." "Yes, let it be so." Rhaegar turned, his expression modest yet laced with determination. "My lord," he addressed Robert, "you will join me and the king in a more private chamber. Let us talk plainly, as men who wish the best for the realm." He paused, glancing at Jon Arryn. "Lord Arryn, your counsel would be most welcome as well." Together, they left the great throne room. Robert noted the hush in the crowd behind them, followed by hushed whispers once they were out of earshot. Down a corridor and through a set of ornate doors, they went, entering a spacious solar, hung with tapestries of Targaryen triumphs from ages past. The windows let in the last of the day's light, and the smell of dust and parchment suggested it was a place not often used for lavish feasts, but for serious conversation. Servants stepped forward to pour wine into goblets, though Robert half expected them to test it for poison first. Aerys eased into a cushioned chair with a sigh, while Rhaella hovered near the mantel, quiet as a wraith. Rhaegar gestured for Robert and Jon Arryn to be seated. The initial pleasantries were strained. Aerys muttered about old tournaments, recalling some distant detail. Rhaegar filled the silence with a calm assurance, occasionally exchanging a nod with Robert. Jon Arryn was silent, his eyes measuring the interplay carefully. At last the king leaned forward in his seat and cleared his throat, the dryness in his voice palpable. "The realm is large," he said, "and the responsibilities of the crown weigh heavily. My son has convinced me that forging a new bond with the great houses will ensure stability. We cannot have petty quarrels or rumors of disloyalty undermining the throne." Robert watched the king closely. Aerys' hands flexed on the arms of the chair, as though grasping at invisible foes. The man might be offering an olive branch, but mania never seemed far from the surface. "Rhaegar has given me wise counsel," Aerys continued. "He says that the Stormlands would be a valuable ally. Historically, your family served us well. Stefan Baratheon. Yes, we remember him. We remember the sadness when he perished at sea. You were but a boy, but you have grown into a man of renown, Robert." Deberwennen. Robert did not trust the note of familiarity in the king's voice. Still, he kept his tone even. "My father served faithfully. I too have always sought the well-being of my people." Rhaegar leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We must consider the future. And there is a future we can shape together, if we are wise. My father and I have discussed a formal alliance, a union of sorts, that would bind House Targaryen and House Baratheon inextricably. The Dragon Pact. That is what we call it. Now you and Sty." Robert took a moment to let the words settle. He glanced at Jon Arryn, who met his gaze with a slight inclination of his head. The older man seemed neither shocked nor dismissive. Robert inhaled. "And what terms might the crown be considering?" Aerys let out a small laugh that caught in his throat. "If we are to forge strong alliances, there must be blood ties, yes? Marriage, titles, shared purpose. We have in mind a match that would make your loyalty indisputable, Baratheon. In the old days, Targaryen blood was revered, set apart. But we are not blind to the realm's changing tides." Mendarfanhai. Rhaegar took up the narrative when his father's words trailed into an odd murmur. "My sister Daenerys is young, as you know, an infant truly at present. But there is visories, or considerations for future betrothals, that would secure the bond. Another option is a wardship that ensures mutual respect until the younger Targaryens come of age. We might explore various ways to seal the pact." Now. Robert's eyebrows rose. The mention of Daenerys took him aback. An infant, indeed. But Targaryens often betrothed young. It was not uncommon for families to arrange marriages for children or even babes in the cradle. Still, the notion sat strangely with him. Perhaps they intended to promise Daenerys' hand to him or to a future son of his, thereby tying the families together. He had expected something involving Rhaegar's own children, though Rhaegar's daughter Rhaenys was also but a child, and rumored to be betrothed eventually to some Martell. He measured his words carefully, aware that Aerys' mood could shift at the slightest provocation. Such alliances must be handled with delicacy, your graces. House Baratheon has no desire to undermine the crown, nor do we deny the greatness of House Targaryen. But for a pact to hold, it must be equitable and just. My people would not want to see me bend the knee without fair reciprocation. Aerys' nostrils flared slightly at that. But Rhaegar stepped in smoothly. "Of course, we would not ask for servitude. Our aim is partnership, to quell disquiet in the realm, to ensure that should storms gather, the crown can rely on loyal and proud allies rather than fearful or resentful ones." Robert saw the flicker in Rhaegar's eyes, a genuine desire for stability. He found himself almost liking the prince, in spite of the Targaryen name. Rhaegar was known to be gentle with the people, a lover of prophecy and song, but also a formidable warrior when roused. He was no mere dreamer. Jon Arryn cleared his throat softly. "Might I inquire, your graces, how you envision the realm's governance if such a pact is made? Lord Robert has a deep respect for the realm's traditions, and we wonder what changes, if any, you propose." The king glowered, but Rhaegar responded readily. "Much depends on how swiftly we can quell the friction among the other houses. We have heard rumors, suspicions that House Lannister grows weary of the crown's demands. that the North does not care for the Targaryen presence. Such alliances must expand beyond Storm's End if we are to see lasting peace. But first, we begin here. If House Baratheon stands with us, unwaveringly, we can approach the others from a position of unity. Father believes, and I concur, that one loyal pillar can anchor the entire structure. Biden? Aerys let out a short laugh that turned into a cough. We do not want war. No. War is too costly. But we will not abide disloyalty either. Fire and blood are still ours to command if we must. No. Robert dipped his head in a gesture of acknowledgement. I understand, Your Grace. The might of the crown is indisputable. Silence settled over them, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Robert glanced at the tapestry on the far wall. An image of Aegon the Conqueror astride his black dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, raining fire on Harrenhal. It was a stark reminder of what Targaryen power had once been. Dragons now existed only in rumors or the house's sigil, yet the memory of their devastation lingered in every corner of the realm. Eventually, Rhaegar spoke again, his tone lightening somewhat. We invite you to remain in the Red Keep as our guest for some weeks, Lord Baratheon. Let us share feasts, tournaments, perhaps even a hunt in the Kingswood. Meanwhile, we shall negotiate the finer details of the Dragon Pact. I would very much like to have your counsel, to learn more of how you govern the Stormlands and how we might replicate such success across the realm. In time, I believe we can reach a formal treaty that pleases us both. Nay. Robert nodded slowly. The invitation was as much a courtesy as it was a thinly veiled requirement that he not depart until they had concluded. But it provided him time to see how matters stood in King's Landing, and to gauge the hearts of other lords present. He would also watch Aerys carefully, to see how deep this momentary civility ran. I accept, Prince Rhaegar, he said. I shall remain and explore this prospect of peace and unity. Aerys grinned, his teeth bared in a grin that Robert found more unsettling than reassuring. Then, let us drink to that, he proclaimed, beckoning the servants to refill their goblets. Wine splashed into each cup, the aroma rich and heady. The king raised his goblet. To House Baratheon and House Targaryen. May they stand together in the face of any storm. Robert raised his cup with the others and took a swallow of the fine vintage, though he kept his wits about him. Jon Arryn did the same. In that moment, a strange hush seemed to settle in Robert's mind, a sense of stepping onto a path whose ending he could not foresee. They parted soon after. Aerys, claiming fatigue, retreated with his queen and courtiers, leaving Rhaegar to ensure that Robert and Jon were guided back to their chambers. Outside in the corridor, the prince paused, studying Robert with a mild curiosity. There was a glimmer in Rhaegar's violet eyes that hinted at depths Robert did not yet understand. Thank you, my lord, Rhaegar said softly, for agreeing to speak of peace rather than brandish arms. I know the Stormlands have their pride, and you have your own formidable strength. But if we can stand shoulder to shoulder, think of what good might be done for the realm. Nandam Sachin. It is my hope as well, Robert answered, though he tempered his tone. But I am no fool. There are many in my house, and beyond it, who doubt the crown's sincerity. If you wish this pact to succeed, you must convince them with actions, not just words. Rhaegar gave a gentle smile. Words are but the first step, my lord. Rest well. We shall speak more on the morrow. No. With that, the prince departed, leaving Robert with Jon Arryn. They exchanged a look. Jon's face was composed, but in the lines around his eyes, Robert thought he saw caution and a flicker of curiosity. They made their way back to the suite. Robert's knights, on edge, awaited them, worried eyes scanning every corner. They asked how the meeting had gone, and Robert gave them what reassurances he could. Then, he and Jon retired behind closed doors to speak more freely. Jon Arryn poured them each a small measure of wine, though Robert only sipped it. What's your reading of all this, Jon? Robert asked, settling into a chair by the window. Night had fallen, and the lights of King's Landing below were like scattered stars in the darkness. Jon considered. I see a prince who genuinely wants to avert war, and a king tottering between paranoia and fleeting lucidity. Rhaegar is playing a delicate game, one that might succeed if we are careful. But what do you think? Robert let out a low rumble, setting his goblet aside. I think the Targaryens see the writing on the wall. They know their hold is not what it used to be. Maybe they fear my growing alliances, or they worry about the North or the Westerlands. So they're trying to buy loyalty with an alliance. But if that alliance leads to genuine cooperation, he paused, his mind drifting to the horrors a war would bring. Perhaps it's worth pursuing. Jon dipped his head in agreement. We must tread lightly. The king is unpredictable, but Rhaegar, he could be a good friend to have, if a friend is what you want. The older man's tone softened. You have a good heart, Robert, for all your bluster. This might be a chance to spare the realm a bloody conflict. Nemchansei. Yes, Robert acknowledged quietly. And if the Targaryens break faith, we'll know. And then all 7 kingdoms will see them for what they are. But I'd rather not see dragons, real or metaphorical. Set the realm aflame. Let's see what tomorrow brings. They lapsed into silence, each man alone with his thoughts. Robert thought of the possibility of wedlock to a Targaryen child, or some arrangement that bound him hand and foot to the throne. He disliked the notion of being under the influence of Aerys, but perhaps Rhaegar's presence could temper the Mad King. Perhaps an honest alliance was within reach. The alternative was fear, suspicion, a slow build toward rebellion that would tear the land apart. His father had died under uncertain circumstances, and Robert had grown up fast. He understood the cost of bloodshed. If forging an arrangement could stave off the worst of it, maybe it was the path he should tread. Morning arrived with the sky tinged pink and gold over Blackwater Bay. Robert awoke to the smell of bread baking somewhere in the keep, mingling with the faint stench that always hovered around King's Landing. He dressed quickly, donning a dark blue doublet embroidered with the golden stag. A surcoat of black sturdy boots and a leather belt completed the ensemble. He left his warhammer locked away for the time being. There was no call for arms just yet. Jon Arryn joined him in the corridor, and together they made their way to a small courtyard garden the servants had indicated. Rhaegar was there, examining a flowering shrub with quiet interest. He looked up as they arrived, a polite smile touching his lips. "Good morrow," the prince greeted. He wore simpler attire now, a tunic of dark gray. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Robert allowed, glancing around the garden. It was small but serene, with a trickling fountain at the center and neatly trimmed hedges. "Your city is never quiet, though. One can hear it buzzing even through these walls." Rhaegar nodded. "Aye, King's Landing is a restless beast. But sometimes in corners like this, one can pretend it's peaceful." He straightened and gestured for them to walk with him. "I've arranged a gathering in the Royal Solar soon. Some members of the small council, Lord Varys, Grand Maester Pycelle, and a few others. My father may join us if he's in the proper mood. I'd ask that you attend. It will be our first step toward open discussions about the alliance. Before we delve into the matter, though, I thought we might talk informally." Robert arched a brow. "Talk about what, my prince?" A soft breeze ruffled Rhaegar's hair. "Of your father, Lord Stefan, and of how you grew the Stormlands into the force it is today. Of your goals. I want to know who you are, Robert. Not simply the lord with an army." "Diana." Robert studied the prince's face, seeking any hint of duplicity. All he found was sincere curiosity, tinted with a faint sadness, as though Rhaegar carried a heavy burden on his own shoulders. "I lost my father young, as you know," Robert said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "I've had to learn to be lord of my people without much guidance. Jon Arryn here took me under his wing, taught me what he could. My mother was, well, she bore her grief in her own way after my father drowned. So I turned my sorrow into strength. My people needed a Baratheon, and I resolved to be the best I could. The Stormlands are not the richest nor the largest domain, but we are fierce, and storms only make us stronger." Rhaegar listened intently, nodding as they walked a slow circuit around the fountain. Jon Arryn followed a pace behind, content to let them speak. "I see," Rhaegar said at length. "I lost my sister too, Princess Shayna years ago. She died in infancy. And my father's transformations have been difficult to witness. Perhaps we both understand the harsh lessons of grief and responsibility. Madame Merci. They came to a pause by a trellis of climbing roses. Rhaegar reached out, gently touching a bloom. I read the histories often, he said, his voice going soft. Once we, Targaryens, commanded dragons. The realm bent before our might. It was conquest. But now, I think the realm would benefit from unity rather than fear. Robert exhaled. Your father doesn't exactly radiate reassurance, with his talk of fire and blood. Rhaegar's mouth pressed into a thin line. My father is who he is. I won't lie to you, I too worry. But I hope that if we can forge an alliance, if the realm sees that the Stormlands stand beside the crown, it will soothe tensions. Others may follow your lead. And in time, perhaps we can rein in the madness that sometimes grips King Aerys. But no. A jolt of pity and admiration stirred in Robert. He realized that Rhaegar was more prisoner than prince in some ways, trapped by the burden of a father whose mental state was an open secret. I'll do what I can, he said quietly, as long as I'm convinced this pact is for the good of my people. I won't sacrifice the Stormlands just to prop up a throne if it proves unworthy. I wouldn't expect you to, Rhaegar said, meeting his gaze. They walked on in silence, the hush of the garden only broken by the burble of water. The moment felt oddly companionable. Jon Arryn cleared his throat gently. We should make our way to the Solar, my prince. We don't want to keep the small council waiting. Rhaegar nodded in agreement, and they exited the garden. Crossing through winding corridors, they eventually arrived at the Royal Solar, a spacious room with high windows allowing sunlight to spill across a long table. Already seated were several men of note. Lord Varys, his hands folded demurely in the sleeves of his robes, smiling with an enigmatic air. Grand Maester Pycelle, tugging at his long white beard, and other courtiers of lesser renown. Rhaegar took a seat at the head of the table, Robert and Jon Arryn to his left. The others spread around. A vacant seat near Rhaegar's right presumably awaited King Aerys, though the king was nowhere to be seen. Shall we begin? Rhaegar asked, clasping his hands atop the table. He addressed Varys first. Lord Varys, would you kindly outline the recent concerns, and how an alliance with House Baratheon might alleviate them? Varys inclined his head with a smooth smile. But of course, my prince, there have been troubling whispers from Dorne, the Iron Islands, and indeed, in the Westerlands. Each region watches the crown, waiting to see if it remains stable. The possibility of forging a strong bond with Storm's End will radiate through the realm. A demonstration that House Targaryen does not stand alone in these uncertain times. The spider's voice was airy, each syllable carefully measured. Robert watched him intently, aware that Varys was said to know every secret worth knowing in the realm. Rumors are powerful, Varys continued. If we can produce a tangible sign of unity, a betrothal or a joint decree of some kind, it will quell the seeds of rebellion in those who might be entertaining seditious thoughts. After all, if House Baratheon, a formidable power, sides with the crown, it makes open defiance less likely. No, Pycelle chimed in, stroking his beard. A splendid notion indeed. Yes, yes. And with the king's blessing, it might be declared at a grand feast, so that the lords of the realm witness the sincerity of this arrangement. A public vow, or an oath-taking, perhaps. Symbolism is important in these matters. Robert listened, letting them spin their webs of words. If a public vow was required, it would be far more difficult to retract. He wondered what Ned Stark would think of all this. No doubt his friend in the north would want to see the Targaryens gone, given the rumors of how the king had threatened Lord Rickard, Stark, and Brandon. But that tragedy had not yet exploded into full-blown war. Perhaps an alliance might avert such bloodshed. When a lull in the conversation arrived, Rhaegar turned to Robert. My lord, do you have any thoughts on how best to assure your vassals and bannermen that an alliance is truly in their favor? I am aware that the Stormlands hold to a proud code of loyalty and bravery. They do, Robert agreed. My men respect strength and clarity. They do not like half-promises or hidden designs. If you want my bannermen to fall in line, show them this arrangement is more than just words on parchment. Offer us something real. That could be trade agreements, perhaps farmland or shipping privileges, something tangible that my lords can grasp. We might also consider guaranteeing the Stormlands a greater voice in the small council, or the ability to weigh in on decisions that affect the realm's defense. Let them know they have influence, not just obligations. Nain. Varys nodded enthusiastically. An excellent suggestion, my lord. Power must flow both ways if it is to create a lasting partnership. Oh. Jon Arryn leaned forward. What of the North and the Vale? If House Baratheon stands with the crown, might we also invite the Arryns, the Starks, the Tullys? Strength in numbers would allay many fears. Rhaegar's features took on a thoughtful cast. We could. First though, we see this pact through. Once House Baratheon is with us, I shall reach out to the Vale, the Riverlands, and beyond, to establish a broader coalition. But your point is well taken, Lord Arryn. Peace depends upon more than a single alliance. Oh. They continued in this vein for the better part of an hour, discussing potential terms, ceremonies, the feasible timeline of a marriage arrangement. At times, Robert felt a pang of reluctance. Marriage to a Targaryen, even an infant betrothal, would entangle his house for generations. But the alternative might well be war, the Targaryens seeing him as an enemy if he refused. And so he listened, letting the shape of this so-called dragon pact form in the air around them. As they spoke, a subtle tension hovered in the room, as though everyone present was aware that all these words depended on King Aerys's mercurial temper. They might craft the perfect treaty, only for the king's madness to derail it in an instant. Still, Rhaegar was the crown prince, and it seemed he was determined to push this endeavor forward. Eventually, Rhaegar thanked them all and signaled that the meeting was concluded for the morning. We shall meet again soon, he said. Take this time to rest, to compose your notes. I will confer with my lord father. Let us hope his mood remains. He hesitated, and a faint shadow crossed his face. Let us hope he remains open to reason. Robert stood, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness of sitting. A long road lies ahead, but I'll give it a fair chance. My men and I remain at your disposal, Prince Rhaegar. As they departed, Robert couldn't help but feel the swirl of fate around him. Perhaps forging a pact with dragons would save them all from a worse calamity. Or perhaps he was stepping into a labyrinth. Only time would tell. Leaving the solar, he and Jon Arryn walked back through the corridors. Courtiers bowed or curtsied as they passed, but Robert barely noticed. His thoughts were drifting to the Stormlands. To the men who had accompanied him and were likely busy in the keep's courtyard or guard rooms, he wanted to reassure them, to keep their spirits up. They had come here expecting any number of outcomes, from a false imprisonment to outright conflict. Instead, they found themselves in a precarious dance of diplomacy. They returned to the suite where the knights were waiting. The men looked eager for news, and Robert obliged them with a measured explanation. We're talking alliances, he said. It's all talk for now, but it's cordial. The crown wants us as allies. We'll see how it goes. Some nodded, relieved. Others eyed him with lingering skepticism. But they asked no further questions. Robert sank into a seat near the window, gazing out at the city. Across the sprawling rooftops, the waters of the Blackwater Rush sparkled in the midday sun, and the bay stretched beyond it. The ship masts swayed near the harbor, the daily hum of commerce oblivious to the high-stakes game unfolding within the Red Keep. A warm breeze fluttered the curtains, carrying the faint smell of salt and sewage. Robert's gaze turned inward. So much hinged on the madness or cunning of a king, on the patience and vision of a prince, and on whether House Baratheon could remain true to its own honor while tethering itself to dragons. He sensed the weight of history on his shoulders, as though the ghosts of past kings and lords hovered at his back, watching to see if he would stand tall or stumble. Jon Arryn took a seat beside him, quietly setting a hand on his shoulder. Steady, Robert. This is but the first step. Robert murmured. brushing a hand through his thick hair. The first step of a long march. For the moment, all he could do was breathe and wait, letting the tides of fate carry him further along this uncertain path. Outside, the bells of a distant sept tolled, marking the passing of another hour. And somewhere in the depths of the Red Keep, King Aerys Targaryen paced or brooded, his mind flickering between visions of flame and illusions of control, while Rhaegar struggled to hold everything together. The silent corridors, the hidden passages, the watchful eyes of the court. Each was a thread in a tapestry that would define the fate of the realm. Robert closed his eyes, not for rest but to steel himself. The Dragon Pact was coming. Even now, its shape was being drawn in the lines of every conversation, every guarded smile, every vow. Soon enough, the realm would know what it meant for Storm's End and King's Landing to stand as one, bound together beneath the banner of the three-headed dragon and the crowned stag. Whether that would be a triumph or a tragedy, none could yet say. For now, Robert resolved that if he must deal with dragons, he would do so with all the strength and honor he possessed, and hope it would be enough. Until night thickened around the Red Keep, a velvet darkness punctuated by lanterns flickering along the battlements. Within the walls, torches illuminated corridors and chambers, lending everything a warm glow that contrasted with the faint chill that often haunted the stone passages at night. Robert could not yet sleep. Too many thoughts churned in his mind as he wandered, his footsteps echoing softly on flagstone floors. Some guards recognized him and bowed. Others merely kept a vigilant eye, uncertain whether the broad-shouldered lord sought conversation or solitude. He gave them each a curt nod, letting them know he required neither their chatter nor an escort. He walked without clear direction, letting his steps guide him deeper into the heart of the Red Keep. He passed through a narrow hallway, where stained glass windows depicted long-dead Targaryen kings in various moments of triumph. Their colored shapes caught the torchlight in hues of red, gold, and deep violet, casting strange patterns on the walls. He paused for a moment before one panel, showing Aegon the Conqueror crowned in fire and steel. And something in Robert stirred, a sense of the ancient gravity that came with confronting a dynasty so steeped in the realm's history. He'd intended to return to his chamber and seek some semblance of rest, but his feet brought him instead to a small balcony that overlooked the sprawling torchlit city below. He stepped out into the night air. The sky was clear, and the moon hung over the rooftops. Beneath that moonlight, King's Landing looked almost serene, the usual chaos reduced to distant pinpricks of light and indistinct noise. From here, the city's reek was replaced by the salt wind off Blackwater Bay, ruffling his dark hair. He folded his arms on the balcony rail and closed his eyes, letting the wind brush away some of his worries. The day's negotiations echoed through his thoughts. If the Targaryens sought to unify, if Rhaegar's dream was genuine, it could spare countless lives. Robert was not ignorant of the rumored horrors war could bring. The Mad King had once threatened to burn entire families alive if they dared stand against him. House Baratheon's ascendancy made Robert a target if lines were drawn. He was no shrinking flower. He would face war if forced. But if an alliance could anchor stability, he would not lightly discard that option. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned, half expecting one of his knights. Instead, he saw a slight figure in a hooded cloak. He tensed, ready to demand an introduction. But the figure lowered the hood, and candlelight from an inside sconce revealed the smooth face of Varys. The Master of Whisperers gave him a courteous bow. "My Lord Baratheon," Varys said in a voice as soft as the breeze. "Forgive me if I startled you. I often stroll these corridors at night, and I spied you passing by." Shout. Robert relaxed, though only somewhat. There was something about Varys that made him want to keep a hand on his warhammer. Of course, he had no hammer on him now. "Lord Varys," he greeted. "I suppose you're used to creeping around in the dark." Varys smiled, unruffled. "One could say I have grown fond of seeing the Red Keep, when few others stir." "How do you find the city in these quiet hours?" Robert leaned back against the railing, crossing his arms over his chest. "A sight calmer than by day. If only it could remain so." "Yes," Varys murmured, moving closer to the balcony edge. He cast a glance downward, where a handful of lights glittered near the wharves. The city stirs with rumors of your arrival. Some say the king and prince plan to name you Hand. Others say you're to wed the infant princess. Some rumors are quite outlandish, as you can imagine. The people of King's Landing rarely pass up a chance for idle gossip. Robert scoffed. If the king or prince named me Hand, I imagine half the realm would explode in disbelief. As for the princess, she's but a babe. You'd think they'd be more cautious with such talk. Destiny. Varys nodded sympathetically. In my experience, caution is not always a strong suit of those who dwell in rumor. But your presence does have them buzzing. And some wonder if your banners will march or kneel. Both. Robert offered a wry half-smile. In truth, I'm still deciding if this alliance is more promise than trap. The Master of Whisperers tilted his head in a curious gesture. And what does your heart tell you? That I'd rather not see my people die for a cause that could be settled with a pact. Robert admitted, his voice low. But I won't be a fool either. I'll guard my house, no matter the cost. Varys' eyes gleamed in the torchlight. A wise stance, my lord. And if you ever have questions, or if your scouts fail to uncover something you wish to know, my little birds can often provide answers. Information is the key to security, after all. Robert gave a curt nod, uncertain how to navigate the man's offer. I'll keep that in mind, Lord Varys. For now, I'll wait and see how tomorrow's discussions go. Bow. With that, he pushed off from the balcony rail. Varys stepped aside with a gracious bow, allowing Robert to pass. The Lord took one last glance at the city lights, then made his way down the corridor, the hush of night swallowing his footfalls. Once he reached his room, he found his knights stationed outside. They made room for him to enter, and he settled onto the simple bed, exhaustion overtaking his restless energy. Before long, sleep claimed him. When morning came, the sun rose as a pale disk behind a drifting veil of gray clouds. The entire keep seemed to stir earlier than usual. Robert woke to the distant clang of practice swords in the yard, and the hum of voices carrying through the stone halls. After washing up quickly, he dressed in a tunic of dark green, trimmed with gold thread at the cuffs. Though it was simpler than the finery some might wear at court, it bore his house colors clearly. He had always preferred directness over ostentation. Jon Arryn awaited him in the antechamber, looking measured and composed. "Good morning, my lord," he said by way of greeting. "I hear the crown is planning a feast this evening. Word travels quickly here in King's Landing." Robert nodded, running a hand through his hair. "A feast in my honor, or in the Alliance's honor, I suspect. Rhaegar wants to be sure the realm sees some sign of unity." "So it would seem," Jon replied. "Are you prepared for more dancing around each other's words?" A short laugh rumbled in Robert's chest. "As prepared as I can be, I suppose. Better a feast than the alternative." Together, they stepped out of the rooms, escorted by a pair of Baratheon guards. A Targaryen steward soon met them in the corridor, bowing deeply before announcing that Prince Rhaegar awaited Lord Baratheon in the library, an old vaulted chamber behind the throne room complex. Robert shrugged at Jon, and they followed the steward's lead. The library was an impressive space. Towering shelves groaned beneath the weight of countless tomes and scrolls, the smell of parchment and leather binding heavy in the air. Slender columns rose to a high ceiling vaulted with arches painted in faded images of dragons. Rhaegar stood near a broad table where several books were spread out. On hearing footsteps, he glanced up and offered a small smile. "Lord Robert, Lord Arryn," he greeted quietly. "Thank you for coming." Robert inclined his head. "Prince Rhaegar, you summoned us." Rhaegar gestured at the open tomes. "I did. I've been reading over historical accounts of alliances that shaped the realm. When House Targaryen first united with various lords after the conquest, for instance. I hoped we could discuss which traditions might be worth reviving, and which are better left to the dust." "Dare no." Robert eyed the sprawling texts. "I'm no maester, my prince. I prefer simpler words to lengthy records. But I'll listen." Rhaegar traced a finger along a passage in one book. "When Aegon the Conqueror landed, He famously secured the loyalty of certain houses by offering them autonomy in matters of local governance, so long as they recognized the crown's ultimate authority. The Storm Kings resisted at first, but eventually, Argilac Durandon fell to Oris Baratheon. Afterwards, House Baratheon was established. In short, an alliance was formed in blood and conquest. We wish to avoid blood this time. I find it intriguing that in the years that followed, there were formal pacts between Targaryen kings and lords of the Stormlands, reaffirming mutual respect. Those pacts were sometimes sealed with marriages. Jon Arryn nodded. You are referencing the old records from the reign of King Aenys and King Jaehaerys, if memory serves. Yes, Rhaegar confirmed. They highlight a pattern of bridging house differences. I want to use them as precedent. If the realm sees that this is not some new or desperate invention, but rather a return to a time-honored tradition of cooperation, it may quell suspicion. Man? Robert glanced at the nearest dusty volume, where an elaborate painting showed a Targaryen king crowned in a swirl of light. Fair enough, my prince. But the real question is, what shape does this present alliance take? A promise? A marriage? Specific rights granted to the Stormlands? Rhaegar's gaze flicked to Jon Arryn. Likely, all three, my father. He hesitated. My father will not yield on the idea of a union by marriage. It's a point of pride and a test of loyalty. But the details are flexible. Viserys is older than Daenerys, but still a child. A betrothal could be arranged, an understanding that one day House Baratheon and House Targaryen are bound by blood. In return, the Stormlands might receive certain trade concessions, a seat on the small council if so desired, and an opportunity for your voice to carry weight in shaping future policy. That seat could be yours, or delegated to a trusted bannerman. My father might even go so far as naming you Master of Laws or Master of Ships, if it helps reassure your people that House Baratheon is no mere underling. Robert mulled it over. He didn't relish the thought of tying his house's fate to Targaryen children who were barely out of the cradle, but it was not unheard of among noble families. The important part was ensuring the Stormlands gained real benefits from such a union. I can't deny it's a strong statement, he admitted. But betrothing a child who can't speak yet is always precarious. The realm changes fast. Man. A faint shadow crossed Rhaegar's face. True. We can prepare the vow but allow time for the children to grow before finalizing any marriage. Meanwhile, we proceed with visible friendship. Let us see how the lords respond. If the realm stabilizes, the betrothal can become a celebrated event. If there's turbulence, we adjust accordingly. Robert exchanged glances with Jon Arryn, who nodded thoughtfully. Then Robert spoke. All right. I'm open to discussing it. We'll talk terms. But I'd want to ensure that if the king's madness grows worse, my house isn't bound to a sinking ship. That's a blunt way to say it, I know. Rhaegar's jaw tightened slightly, though he spoke calmly. I understand your concern. My father is still the king, but he will not reign forever. When it's my time to rule, I promise I'll strive for peace and prosperity. If we seal this pact, I'll do all in my power to safeguard your people. Robert inclined his head in acknowledgement. Though he didn't voice it, a spark of empathy stirred in him for Rhaegar, a man forced to negotiate around a father who might unravel at any moment. Very well. Let's see how we can make this official. Tonight's feast. Are you planning an announcement? Rhaegar's glance flicked toward the library door, as if to ensure no prying ears lurked. Not an official announcement. No, Diwati. My father's mood can change, so it's best if we wait until he's consistently supportive. I thought we'd let the realm's lords and ladies see us dining together, exchanging pleasantries, forging connections. Sometimes an unspoken alliance can be just as powerful as a declared one, until it's time to put words on paper. Deminar. Robert took a breath, feeling the weight of it all. Then I'll do my part this evening to show goodwill. I'm not the best courtier, but I can be civil. Rhaegar's lips curved in a gentle smile. That's all I ask, Lord Baratheon. They spoke a while longer about protocol, how they might present themselves at the feast, which courtiers or lords might be seated near them. Jon Arryn contributed observations about how to remain vigilant, reminding them that King Aerys could erupt in paranoia if he felt overshadowed by Rhaegar's popularity. Yet for now, it seemed the prince had the king's ear, at least enough to proceed. Eventually, they parted ways. Rhaegar took one of the thick tomes, tucking it under his arm, intent on reading further. Robert and Jon Arryn left the library together, weaving through corridors bright with morning light. They discussed the necessity of sending word to Storm's End to keep the bannermen informed, perhaps also discreetly writing to Eddard Stark, or other allies who might be curious about these developments. The morning gave way to afternoon, and preparations for the feast were well underway by the time Robert returned to his chambers. Servants bustled about, draping hallways with Targaryen banners, though Robert noticed a new addition: smaller cloth of gold pennants bearing the crowned stag of Baratheon. It was a subtle but deliberate gesture. He also spotted the occasional sigil of House Martell or Tyrell. It seemed Rhaegar wished to invite representatives from multiple houses, so that news of the budding Targaryen-Baratheon camaraderie would spread across Westeros. Robert took a quick midday meal with his knights, discussing the arrangement so far. Some of them remained wary, but Robert assured them that open conflict was not on the horizon. One night, Ser Courtnay Penrose voiced concern that the Targaryens might be lulling them into a false sense of security. Robert appreciated the caution, but he reminded Ser Courtnay that suspicion alone could lead them to ruin if they refused any possible compromise. When evening's approach set the corridors aglow with torchlight, Robert dressed in a more formal doublet of deep black, decorated at the shoulders and cuffs with gold thread in the shape of stags. He wore a cloak pinned with a golden stag brooch, a token of his lordship. Jon Arryn too wore subdued finery, marking his station without gaudy flourishes. Together, they followed the flow of courtiers making their way to the Great Hall. As they entered, Robert's eyes swept the cavernous space. 100 or more tables were arranged, the dais at the far end raised for the king, queen, and close family. Banners in red, black, and gold draped from the high ceiling. Servants carried platters of roasted meats, fragrant stews, fresh bread, and an assortment of fruits. The smell was enough to make one's stomach rumble. Musicians in a corner were warming up lutes and pipes, preparing tunes that might liven the evening. Near the dais, Robert recognized members of the King's Guard, resplendent in their white cloaks. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, allowing him a view of King Aerys seated at the highest seat. His hair, though thinning, was brushed to a semblance of regal arrangement, and his robes shone with red and black embroidery. Queen Rhaella sat at his side, her face a mask of poise. Rhaegar was beside his mother, dressed in a high-collared tunic of dark crimson. Viserys and young Princess Daenerys were not in attendance, too young to handle such a grand affair, most likely. At the king's left, an empty seat presumably awaited Robert, and at the king's right, one awaited Rhaegar, showing an emphasis on the close proximity to House Targaryen. Robert made a respectful bow, feeling the eyes of the hall upon him. Aerys nodded sharply, beckoning him to take his place. Jon Arryn took a seat nearby, in a position of importance as well, though not quite at the high table. The hum of conversation dimmed for a moment as Robert climbed the dais steps and settled. Aerys surveyed him with a half-lidded gaze, then clapped his hands once. "Welcome, my lords and ladies," the king announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "We feast tonight to honor the presence of Lord Robert Baratheon, who has come to us on a mission of goodwill. Let it be known that the crown extends its hand to the Stormlands, and we trust in the loyalty and valor of House Baratheon." A polite smattering of applause followed, though Robert sensed some tension behind the murmurs. This was not a typical feast, where the realm's mood was light and carefree. Perhaps many lords and ladies wondered if, by morning, the king would decide otherwise. Rhaegar shot Robert a reassuring look, and then nodded to the assembled throng. Food began to circulate, wine poured freely, and the first strains of music filled the air. As Robert sampled roast duck glazed with honey, Aerys leaned toward him, speaking in a low voice that only those at the high table might catch. "I trust you find the Red Keep hospitable, Lord Baratheon?" the king asked, his tone carrying a subtle edge. Robert swallowed. "Aye, your grace." The hospitality is most generous. Aerys tapped a claw-like nail on the table. Good. And you do not find these walls confining? Some men feel uneasy among Targaryens. They forget we are the rightful rulers. No worse. Robert forced a mild chuckle. I've no such qualms, your grace. I'm here to build trust, not to question your seat. The king made a sound in his throat. See that it remains so, he muttered. Then he turned away, beckoning to a servant for more wine. Robert exhaled slowly, feeling a prickle of annoyance at being so overtly challenged. But this was the game he had agreed to play, so he let it pass without retort. Aerys addressed Rhaegar next, his voice pitched louder to draw attention. My son, I trust you'll regale us with a song tonight. The court always delights in the prince's harp. Rhaegar inclined his head, a hint of reservation in his eyes. If it pleases your grace, I have a new composition that may set a gentle mood for the evening. As conversation around the hall rose and fell, Rhaegar summoned a servant to bring forth a silver-stringed harp. The prince stood, quieting the assembly with a raised hand. He plucked a few notes, sweet and sorrowful, that echoed in the great hall. Then, in a voice that was neither loud nor timid, he began to sing a soft lament of ancient heroes, referencing a time before the conquest, when the first men walked the land. His singing voice was soothing, each note precise, laced with a distant longing. Even Robert, not often one for music, found himself oddly moved by the melody. The final note lingered in the air, and a hush followed before the hall erupted into applause. Robert clapped along with the rest, acknowledging the prince's talent. He caught a glimpse of Aerys, who nodded stiffly, though the king's eyes darted around as if suspicious of the admiration Rhaegar received. Queen Rhaella smiled in her subdued way, gently touching Rhaegar's arm. Rhaegar bowed his head in gratitude. As the feast continued, more courses were brought out. Wine flowed, tongues loosened, and the courtiers began to mingle around the dais. Some approached Robert, offering pleasantries. A stout lord from the Reach praised the strength of the Stormlands, while a slender lady from the Crownlands fluttered her fan, hinting that she hoped to see House Baratheon's knights in a grand tourney someday soon. Robert played the role politely, though it wore on his nerves. He was accustomed to simpler affairs. He would rather have shared a few horns of ale with his men around a roaring fire. Jon Arryn made subtle rounds of the hall, listening to conversation and gleaning bits of gossip. Occasionally, he cast an eye to Robert, nodding if something noteworthy came up. Robert did the same, though from his seat near the king, it was difficult to slip away without drawing attention. Partway through the evening, Rhaegar returned to Robert's side, setting his harp aside. Are you well? The prince asked in a low tone. I know feasts can be tiring, especially with so many curious eyes upon you. Robert shrugged. I can handle a few stares. The harder part is keeping my temper in check when your father jabs at me. A fleeting grimace crossed Rhaegar's face. He can't help himself sometimes. Don't let it trouble you. If we succeed in forging this pact, he'll be forced to show more courtesy. Yin. Robert leaned closer. What are the next steps to ensure we do succeed? Do we put something on parchment tonight, or wait until morning? We wait, Rhaegar advised gently. Tonight is a performance. Let the lords see that we're amiable. Tomorrow, the small council convenes, and we can draft an early version of the pact. If all goes well, my father will sign it. That would mark the start of a formal treaty. The betrothal might still wait until Daenerys is older, or until Viserys. He paused, noticing how Robert's expression hardened at the mention of the boy. We'll discuss it further. Very well, Robert said, reaching for his wine. I'll do my part. Rhaegar seemed about to speak again when a commotion drew their attention. Aerys had stood up from the high table, raising his cup in a sweeping gesture that threatened to spill wine. The music faltered as the room took notice. Hear me, the king announced, his voice wavering yet carrying an undercurrent of tension. We welcome Lord Baratheon, yes, but let none forget the power of the dragon. Should the world conspire against us, our wrath shall be swift. We desire peace, indeed we do, but we shall not be trifled with. Fire and blood remains our oath, does it not? A smattering of uneasy voices answered, Yes, your grace, while others kept silent, uncertain where this might lead. Robert forced a respectful nod. Rhaegar quickly stepped forward, gently placing a hand on the king's shoulder to steady him. "Father," he said softly, "perhaps it's best if you retire now. The feast is winding down." Hamden. Aerys peered at his son. His eyes flicked from Rhaegar to Robert, then back again. "Yes," he said at last. "Let the festivities continue. I'm done with the noise." He pulled his robe about him and motioned for the king's guard to help him descend the dais. Without another word, the king departed, the hush following him like a trailing cloak. Rhaegar exhaled and turned to Robert. "He tires easily these days." Robert grunted. "He's not the only one." A ghost of a smile tugged at the prince's lips. "Take heart. Tonight was a necessary display. Tomorrow, we focus on substance." Now, as the crowd gradually returned to mingling, Robert excused himself. He strode off the dais, descending into the throng where he spotted Jon Arryn near a pillar. People stepped aside, letting him pass. When he reached Jon, the older man arched an eyebrow. "The king's display?" Jon asked quietly. "Nothing unexpected," Robert said. "Still, it leaves a sour taste." They didn't dwell on it for long. Robert said a few more polite farewells, sampling bits of the last course, then left with Jon before the feast's final hour. He craved the open air and the relative calm of his own suite. By the time he reached his chambers, it was well into the night, and the corridors had thinned of courtiers. Inside, a servant was tidying the bed. Robert dismissed the youth, locked the door, and let out a weary breath. Jon Arryn placed a hand on the lord's shoulder. "We've survived one performance," he said. "We'll see what the morrow brings." "Yes," Robert muttered. "Let's see." They parted for the night. Sleep came faster this time. Perhaps the wine and the weight of the day lulled Robert into deep slumber. He dreamt of storms at sea, ships cresting over tumultuous waves, glimpses of a pale dragon perched on a rocky outcrop. Then the image shifted, and he dreamt of a great feast, but the faces were all blurred. He woke at dawn with those images flickering at the edges of his mind. By midday, a summons arrived for another council discussion. This time, Robert was escorted directly to the small council chamber, a more intimate, circular room near the throne room. The walls were hung with tapestries of Targaryen conquests, and a heavy wooden table dominated the center, ringed with chairs. Rhaegar sat in one, flanked by Varys and Grand Maester Pycelle. A seat was reserved for Robert, and another for Jon Arryn. The King's Justice, Lord Chelstead, was in attendance as well, along with 2 other council members. Rhaegar opened the meeting in a measured tone. "My father has read the preliminary terms we drafted last night. He finds them acceptable for the most part. We'd like to go through each section with you, Lord Baratheon, to ensure we're all in agreement." Robert nodded, eyeing the parchment on the table. He noticed the scrawl of Targaryen sigils marking the top margin. Varys cleared his throat delicately and began to read. "In pursuit of unity, House Targaryen and House Baratheon shall establish a formal pact of alliance, guaranteeing mutual defense, trade privileges, and counsel. House Baratheon will, in time, formalize a betrothal to a member of the royal House Targaryen, thereby solidifying blood ties between the 2 houses. In turn, the crown agrees to provide certain economic concessions to the Stormlands, as well as a seat on the small council, ensuring that House Baratheon's voice is heard in matters of the realm's governance." And Varys glanced up, gauging Robert's reaction. "This is the gist, my lord. Details can be refined. We included addendums regarding shipping rights, possible mutual naval exercises, and a broader invitation to other great houses to join a realm-wide stability accord. We do not specify exactly which Targaryen scion is to be betrothed. That is left open so the king might decide as the children age." "That one?" Robert met Rhaegar's gaze. "And if Viserys or Daenerys, if they were to fall ill or something else changes in the coming years, the entire pact rests on a child's fate?" Rhaegar answered carefully. "The betrothal is a symbol. The true heart of the pact is mutual respect and cooperation. Should events change, The pact can be adapted, so long as both parties remain willing. No one can predict the future. But for now, my father insists on the betrothal clause as a sign of good faith. Robert leaned back in his chair, letting the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. Fine. Then let's talk specifics about these economic concessions. I'm not about to hitch the Stormlands to a wagon that leaves us empty-handed. They pored over the details for the better part of an hour. Rhaegar proved amenable, allowing Robert's suggestions on shipping routes to be included, granting the Stormlands favorable tariffs when trading at King's Landing, and even floating the idea that Storm's End might host a major royal event once the betrothal was officially announced. Varys jotted down changes in neat, careful strokes, while Pycelle occasionally interjected with comments about tradition and potential friction with other lords. Robert, for his part, insisted on clarity to avoid any chance that the crown might renege on its promises. Jon Arryn spoke up occasionally, adding a measured perspective, making sure the agreement included language about mutual defense. That if the Stormlands were attacked by foreign invaders or rebellious houses, the crown would send aid. Likewise, if the crown were threatened, House Baratheon would muster its forces to defend the throne. The conversation was civil, but Robert did not miss that Rhaegar's eyes would flick to the door every so often, as though expecting the king might appear at any moment. King Aerys was conspicuously absent, but his unpredictable presence loomed over them. At last, the final draft was prepared, a thick sheaf of parchment with fresh ink still drying. Rhaegar signed at the bottom with a flourish, then passed the quill to Robert. Before setting his quill to paper, Robert scanned the text once more. He felt the weight of centuries in that moment, as though all who had borne the crowned stag before him were watching. This was no small vow, but if it worked, it might spare the realm a brutal war. He dipped the quill and wrote his name in a bold script. When the ink dried, Rhaegar carefully blotted the parchment and gazed upon it. "This is but an early draft," the prince said, "pending my father's formal seal, as well as the acceptance of relevant lords in the Stormlands. Still, it's a milestone." Robert exhaled. It is. Let's hope the king sees it that way." Varys spoke softly, as though a sudden noise might crack the fragile moment. "His Grace was pleased with the concept last night, but we all know his temper can turn. In the meantime, we should hold a smaller private ceremony. Just a handful of witnesses, where Lord Baratheon and Prince Rhaegar can exchange words of oath. That might help ensure no one doubts your sincerity." Rhaegar nodded, then turned his gaze to Robert, seeking confirmation. Robert rubbed his jaw. "I can do that, though I won't recite fancy verses. A plain vow is enough." Rhaegar's lips quirked in faint amusement. A plain vow might carry the most honesty. They agreed to meet in the royal septi that evening, away from the throng of courtiers, accompanied only by a few select individuals. There, they would speak an oath of brotherhood, signifying that House Targaryen and House Baratheon stood united. It would not be as binding as the final treaty, but it would be a show of earnest intent. The afternoon saw Robert in a flurry of preparation. He wrote letters to dispatch to the Stormlands, ensuring his bannermen understood that this was not a moment of subjugation, but an equitable arrangement. Jon Arryn oversaw the scribes, verifying that the letters conveyed exactly the right tone, neither timid nor boastful. By the time dusk arrived, Robert felt drained, yet determined. They made their way to the Royal Sept, a modest structure within the Red Keep's complex. It was smaller than the Great Sept of Baelor in the city proper, but still grand enough, with stained glass windows depicting the seven. Torch sconces lit the interior, illuminating the altars. Rhaegar was already there, dressed in a simple robe of black, the Targaryen dragon embroidered at the breast. Jon Arryn stood off to one side, and a few Targaryen courtiers were present. Grand Maester Pycelle, 2 members of the Kingsguard, and Lord Varys. King Aerys was absent again, citing some complaint about his health. Perhaps it was for the best. Robert approached Rhaegar before the altar. The Septon, robed in white, stood with hands folded over his chest. The flicker of candle flames danced across polished floors. Outside, twilight was settling, the sky a deepening blue. They exchanged a formal bow, then turned to the Septon. He inclined his head and opened a small book, though Robert sensed this was more improvisation than a standard wedding or coronation. The Septon's voice rose in soft tones, invoking the Seven to bless the bond between these two great houses. He spoke of unity, of the realm's need for strong alliances. Robert listened with as much patience as he could muster, aware that Rhaegar's expression remained solemn, focused. When the Septon finished his invocation, he looked to Rhaegar. The prince spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. I, Rhaegar of House Targaryen, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, do swear by the Seven that I hold Lord Robert Baratheon and his house as trusted partners in the governance and defense of the realm. I vow to uphold the terms of our alliance, to seek peace and justice for all under our care, and to respect the sovereignty of the Stormlands. Now in May, he turned to Robert, a gentle question in his gaze. Robert cleared his throat, considering his own vow. He was not a man of flowery speech. He gripped the hilt of a ceremonial dagger that rested at his waist, purely for ritual, and spoke in a voice that resonated through the quiet sept. I, Robert of House Baratheon, Lord of the Stormlands, swear by the Seven that my house shall stand with House Targaryen in preserving the peace and prosperity of the realm. I vow to defend the crown against treachery and to honor the principles of justice and loyalty, so long as those same principles guide the king and his heirs. This I swear. With that, he drew the dagger and lightly pricked his thumb, a small bead of blood forming. It was an old tradition, signifying the seriousness of an oath. He held up his thumb, the droplet catching the candlelight. Rhaegar inclined his head, then offered his own hand for a similar prick. His face remained composed, though Robert noticed the tension in the set of his jaw. Blood welled on the prince's thumb as well. They clasped hands, thumb to thumb, mingling that symbolic drop of blood. The Septon spoke once more, concluding the rite and calling upon the Seven to witness. When they released hands, Rhaegar nodded, the slightest smile breaking through his solemnity. I believe this is a step in the right direction. Robert let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Let the realm see that we're not foes. Pycelle cleared his throat and stepped forward to mark their names in a book that recorded all significant vows made before the royal septati. Varys watched with a serene expression, dipping his head to both men. Jon Arryn came forward, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder in silent support. The Kingsguard knights stood by, silent witnesses in their pale cloaks. At that moment, a new presence entered the septite. Robert turned to see Queen Rhaella, moving with quiet grace along the aisle. She wore a gown of silver gray, and her face seemed etched with relief. She bowed her head to Robert, then looked at her son. Rhaegar, she said softly, your father is resting. He asked for you briefly, then changed his mind. The maesters say he should not be disturbed further tonight. Rhaegar dipped his head. Thank you for telling me, mother. Did he say anything about our vow? Rhaella's expression was tinged with sadness. He muttered that if you trust Baratheons, you shall reap the consequences. But his mind is unquiet. He gave no direct order to stop this. So perhaps that is enough. Namti. A flicker of pain crossed Rhaegar's eyes. Robert could see how much the prince yearned for his father's approval, or at least acceptance. But Aerys was locked in his own madness. Rhaegar inhaled slowly. Then let us carry on. We have done what we needed here. Rhaella moved closer, regarding Robert with a subdued warmth. May this vow ensure peace for the people, my lord. I recall when your father served the crown. He was a good man. Robert bowed his head in respect, remembering his father's time in King's Landing long before tragedy struck. I hope to do his memory justice. In the hush that followed, the tension in the sept lingered, but it was a different kind of tension, as though a door had opened onto the possibility of a better tomorrow. The vow they had shared would not erase all the realm's troubles, but it was a start. There would still be negotiations, minor resentments, the threat of outside forces. Yet in that moment, Robert felt the faint stirrings of belief that perhaps a war could be avoided, that this fragile alliance might bloom into something that kept fire and blood at bay. As they left the sept, the torchlit corridors seemed less oppressive. Rhaegar walked beside Robert, neither man speaking for several steps. Then Rhaegar broke the silence with a quiet murmur. "Thank you, Robert, truly. I know you have every reason to distrust us, but I promise you, my intentions are honest. The realm must not descend into chaos." Robert stared ahead, footsteps echoing. "I want the same. No man alive truly wishes to see his lands burned and his people butchered. If your father can stay his worst impulses, and if you're the kind of ruler people say you are, then we might succeed." "Nan?" When they parted at a fork in the corridor, Rhaegar heading to check on the king, Robert returning to his suite, Robert felt a curious mix of relief and wariness. The vow weighed on his mind, but in a way that grounded him. He had taken a step onto new ground. Rebellion's fires might smolder in hidden corners of the realm, but for now, the crown and the Stormlands stood on the same side, at least on parchment and in words sworn under the eyes of the Seven. Back in his chambers, Robert found Jon Arryn awaiting him, arms crossed. The older man's eyes reflected a guarded optimism. "Well?" Jon asked softly. Robert pressed a hand over the place on his thumb where the small wound was already clotting. "I gave an oath to the Targaryens. If they keep their word, so will I. Let's see if this realm can avoid tearing itself apart." Jon gave a short nod of approval. "We'll soon find out." They lit a single lantern and spoke in hushed tones about the next steps. Sending messages to Storm's End, preparing for potential visits from other lords who would want to question the details of this new alliance. Robert half expected the king to burst in and denounce them, but the corridor beyond remained silent. At last, Jon Arryn withdrew to his own room, leaving Robert to settle down with his weary thoughts. In the days that followed, the Red Keep felt like a beehive of whispers and speculation. The news spread. Lord Baratheon and Prince Rhaegar had made a vow before the Seven, a sign of deeper ties yet to come. Some courtiers expressed relief. Others seemed wary. Robert noticed that when he crossed paths with men from other houses, like the Tyrells or certain Crownlands lords, they were polite, even congratulatory. However, a lingering uncertainty remained. Would King Aerys truly endorse this pact when the time came to seal it with his own royal stamp? Rhaegar, for his part, continued to meet with Robert and Jon Arryn, refining the terms of trade and defense. Now and then, the prince floated an idea of a royal progress through the Stormlands, a chance to show Targaryen goodwill to the small folk. Robert entertained the idea, though he cautioned that not all small folk would welcome a Targaryen presence with open arms. Wounds from past cruelties had not entirely healed. Throughout these conversations, King Aerys stayed mostly out of sight, rarely attending official gatherings. A few times, Robert glimpsed him pacing a corridor, muttering to himself with a Kingsguard knight hurrying behind. Once, Aerys even turned a corner and locked eyes with Robert, studying him with a mixture of scorn and fascination. Then, without a word, the king swept away, robes fluttering like dark wings. No one seemed entirely sure what to make of the tension. Even so, the realm's day-to-day matters continued. Ships arrived at the city's docks, laden with spices, cloth, or news from distant lands. Merchants carried on, and the city watch policed the streets. Within the Red Keep, the forging of the Dragon Pact proceeded step by careful step. Robert found himself growing used to the labyrinth of hallways, the customs of the court. At times, he loathed the layers of formality, but he reminded himself of the greater goal. One evening, word arrived that Tywin Lannister would soon reach the city, accompanied by a retinue from Casterly Rock. The former Hand of the King was known for his cold brilliance and the wealth he commanded. Robert had never been overly fond of the Lannisters. Their reputation for cunning and quiet ruthlessness set him on edge. Still, if the Lannisters' arrival signaled acceptance of the new Targaryen-Baratheon understanding, it might strengthen peace further. Jon Arryn noted the possibility. Lord Tywin's acknowledgement of this pact would carry weight. He once served as the king's hand and still retains considerable influence. If he approves of your arrangement, others might follow suit. Robert only grunted. I wonder how Rhaegar feels about Tywin's presence. The man was once spurned by Aerys when he sought to wed his daughter to Rhaegar. There's bad blood there. Jon Arryn shrugged. We'll see. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. None. And so they waited. The day of Tywin Lannister's arrival dawned bright, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. Servants bustled to prepare a welcoming feast, though it would be smaller than the one for Robert. Rhaegar extended the courtesy, presumably hoping to mend whatever rift lingered with the Lannisters. Robert found himself strangely eager to watch that meeting unfold. If the Lannisters were to offer their blessing, or condemnation, of the new alliance, it might clarify whether this dragon pact truly had a future. That afternoon, from a vantage high on the Red Keep's ramparts, Robert watched the Lannister procession approach. Red and gold banners snapped in the breeze, the golden lion of House Lannister bright against the sky. Armored knights and footmen trailed behind the main carriage. At the head rode Tywin himself, distinct in his proud bearing and stern expression. His short graying hair and trimmed beard made him look every inch the seasoned lord he was. Robert felt a chill of foreboding. Tywin Lannister was not a man given to frivolous niceties. The courtyard filled with the clang of hooves and gear as the Lannisters arrived. Rhaegar, wearing a formal doublet, descended to greet them. Robert stayed back, observing from the steps. Aerys was conspicuously absent yet again, perhaps unwilling or unable to greet his former hand. Rhaegar offered formal courtesies, which Tywin received with the smallest of bows. Robert couldn't hear all their words from his vantage, but he saw the measured tension in the line of Tywin's shoulders, the way Rhaegar's expression remained carefully polite. As the retinue dismounted and servants came forward to see to their horses, Tywin paused, glancing up the steps to where Robert stood. Their eyes met briefly. Tywin offered a slight nod, acknowledging Robert's presence, though no warmth accompanied the gesture. Robert nodded back. Inside the keep, they gathered for a subdued reception in a lesser hall. Wine was poured, and Rhaegar made introductions. Tywin's keen green eyes took in every detail, and his words, though courteous on the surface, carried an undercurrent of scrutiny. He inquired about the state of the realm, the king's health, and the rumored pact with Storm's End. Rhaegar confirmed that discussions were underway, and that a formal arrangement would soon be presented. Robert watched as Tywin's gaze flicked between him and Rhaegar. So the Stormlords shall stand beneath the dragon banner? Tywin asked softly, swirling his wine. A wise move if it spares the realm from strife. Robert met his gaze and replied, a wise move indeed, if the crown keeps its side of the bargain. Tywin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile or a sneer. One must always ensure the contract is airtight, my lord. In my experience, trust is a fragile commodity. But if Prince Rhaegar assures it, I for one am curious to see how it unfolds. Rhaegar intervened smoothly. Lord Tywin, we hope House Lannister will lend its considerable influence to strengthening peace. The realm has bled enough under internal conflicts. Tywin's eyes shifted to Rhaegar, calculating. I served the crown once. I remain loyal to the stability of the realm. If stability is truly what you and your father desire, then House Lannister will not stand in your way. Vial. The exchange ended with that ambiguous statement, leaving Robert to wonder whether Tywin's support would be a boon or a threat. Over the following days, Tywin and his retinue settled into the keep. He attended a handful of council sessions, speaking little but observing intently. Robert suspected Tywin was weighing every advantage, deciding whether to push for more influence in the Pact or let the Targaryens and Baratheons shape it. Meanwhile, the king remained elusive. Murmurs suggested that Aerys had locked himself in his chambers, seeing no one but the queen and a few hand-picked servants. Some said he ranted about traitors. Others claimed he sat in a silent trance. Whatever the truth, it fell to Rhaegar to keep the realm's business moving, and that included finalizing the Dragon Pact. At length, a day was chosen for the official signing. A public event, held once again in the throne room, but this time with only key lords and courtiers in attendance. The doors to the hall were opened wide, letting in fresh light. Torches burned steadily, and guards in Targaryen livery stood at attention. Rhaegar sat on a smaller seat beside the Iron Throne. Tywin Lannister, Jon Arryn, and other influential figures, including Pycelle and Varys, took places of note. Robert arrived with his knights, each bearing the crowned stag. The hush that fell over the gathered assembly was palpable. A herald called out the official purpose of the gathering, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Lords of the realm, attend. This day, House Targaryen and House Baratheon do join hands in a formal pact, ensuring mutual defense and cooperation for the peace of the Seven Kingdoms. Let all bear witness." Oh. Robert stepped forward, the penned parchment in his hands, sealed by the prince's signet. He glanced at Rhaegar, who nodded. Slowly, Robert ascended the dais, mindful of the monstrous shape of the Iron Throne looming behind. At that moment, a murmur swept the crowd. King Aerys appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 King's Guard. His appearance was disheveled, as though he'd rushed from his rooms, hair wild around his face. He wore the same robe from the last feast, slightly rumpled, the Targaryen sigil embroidered in gold thread. He marched to the front, eyes darting from left to right. Rhaegar rose in alarm, stepping away from his seat. Aerys's voice cut through the hush. "I am king here. No treaty is signed without me." Rhaegar held out a calming hand. "Father, of course, we waited for you, but we were told you wished to rest." "Lies," Aerys snarled, pointing a trembling finger at someone in the crowd. "You think you can do this behind my back, but the king sees all. The king knows who plots. Fire and blood for traitors." Tension crackled in the hall. Some courtiers shifted nervously, uncertain whether this would end in a violent outburst. Robert kept his grip tight on the parchment, his heart pounding. Rhaegar, calm but firm, approached Aerys. "Father, the realm needs this pact. You approved it days ago. This is simply the final step." Aerys's eyes flicked to Robert. "Baratheon," he hissed. "Your father served well, but do not think that means I trust you. I see cunning in your eyes. Storm's End is too proud. Perhaps you mean to usurp." Rhaegar placed a hand on Aerys's arm, a gentle but insistent pressure. "No, father, that is not Lord Baratheon's intention. You agreed we must unify. Recall your own words. War is costly, and we must secure peace." Aerys's gaze wavered, some confusion flickering there. Then, he spotted Tywin Lannister. His face twisted in disgust. "And you," he spat. "My old hand. Think you can slither back to see me undone? You shall find me sharper than ever, Lannister. I do not forget your ambitions." Never. Tywin stood still as stone, meeting the king's glare without a flinch. "I serve the realm, your grace." Aerys let out a mirthless laugh, then swung around, focusing again on Rhaegar and Robert. For a heartbeat, Robert thought the king might command the guards to seize them all. But Rhaegar's calm presence seemed to hold him at the brink. The entire hall was poised on a knife's edge. Suddenly, Aerys let out a shaky breath. Yes. I said we would do this, didn't I? The realm must be bound, so traitors cannot conspire. Very well. Where is that parchment?" "Mine." Robert offered the document, stepping forward slowly. Aerys snatched it with trembling hands, scanning the text. Then he looked around as though searching for something. A scribe hurried forward with a fresh quill and an inkpot. Aerys pressed the quill to the parchment, but his hand shook so badly the signature was almost illegible. Still, he scrawled something resembling his name, and then gave it an abrupt swirl that spattered a drop of ink. With a wild grin, he thrust the parchment back at Rhaegar. "There," he said, chest rising and falling. "Let all see the king's word. But mind this, dear son. If Baratheon betrays us, he'll burn like all traitors." Rhaegar swallowed but managed a polite bow. "Thank you, father. You've done as we agreed." Aerys' lips twitched, uncertain. Then, with a whirl of his robe, he stomped out, leaving the entire hall in stunned silence. When the door slammed shut behind him, the tension that had gripped everyone released in a collective sigh. Tywin Lannister's face remained impassive, though Robert thought he detected a flicker of scorn. At the dais, Rhaegar stood, holding the newly signed pact. He faced the gathered lords. "The king has sealed his approval. Let it be known throughout the 7 kingdoms that House Targaryen and House Baratheon are henceforth allied. The details shall be dispatched to every corner of the realm." A wave of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing in force. Robert dipped his head, half in relief, half in grim acceptance. This was the moment they had worked for, yet it was overshadowed by the king's glaring instability. Still, the pact was now official in the eyes of the court and the realm. Rhaegar offered the parchment to Robert, who accepted it carefully, noting the blot of ink near the bottom. "Let the realm see our unity," Rhaegar said quietly. Despite everything, Robert nodded. "So it's done." They descended the dais together, shaking hands in front of all assembled. Though relief pulsed in Robert's veins, he also felt the weight of new responsibilities settle upon him. The crowd parted, and Tywin Lannister approached, bowing slightly in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Well done, Prince Rhaegar. Lord Baratheon, you have your alliance." Robert forced a courteous smile. "We do indeed." Rhaegar turned to address the onlookers. "Let us prepare a modest feast tonight. This is a day of significance for the realm." The courtiers murmured agreement, and Robert could see their faces alight with curiosity. No doubt, they would share every detail with their retinues and spread the word throughout the city. As the hall gradually cleared, Jon Arryn caught up to Robert. The older man's eyes held a touch of humor. "Congratulations. And may the gods help us," he added under his breath. Robert let out a low chuckle that was half a groan. "We've united with the dragon, Jon. Let's hope it doesn't burn us in our sleep." The remainder of that day was a swirl of formalities. A smaller feast took place in one of the keep's halls, not quite as grand as the previous dinners, but enough to mark the occasion with music, wine, and toasted bread. Tywin Lannister attended, remaining silent and watchful. Word had it the Martells and Tyrells would send envoys soon to learn more of this dragon pact. The realm was stirring, uncertain whether to embrace or doubt this new bond. Amid the bustle, Robert found moments of quiet. He stepped outside at one point, onto a low terrace overlooking the Blackwater Rush. There, he breathed in the salty air, letting it cleanse some of the lingering tension in his chest. The vow and the treaty were in place. The question now was what came next. Would the king revert to raving threats? Would Rhaegar's dream of unity extend beyond the Stormlands to the other regions? How would the North respond, or the Vale? Would they bless this arrangement, or bristle at the Targaryens' attempt to reassert control? His gaze wandered to the horizon. The sun was dipping low, staining the sky in hues of orange and pink. In that moment, Robert allowed himself a glimmer of hope. The realm might yet be spared the horrors of a full-scale rebellion. Perhaps, through careful steps and vigilance, House Baratheon and House Targaryen could usher in an era of peace, or at least something less bloody than the alternative. He thought of his father, Steffan, and how the men had once believed in the Targaryen crown. Maybe, in forging this pact, Robert was honoring that legacy in some roundabout way. Even so, a niggling doubt remained. The Mad King's signature was only as stable as his next mood swing, and there were forces outside King's Landing. Lords Tyrell, Stark, Greyjoy, Lannister, who might view this new alignment with their own ambitions. For now, though, Robert had done what he could. The Dragon Pact was sealed, and the realm took notice. Night descended. Torchlight once again lent the Red Keep its moody splendor. The smaller feast concluded without incident. Rhaegar retired early, presumably to check on his father. Robert, walking back to his chamber, felt the stares of onlookers. Some bowed, as though acknowledging his new status. Others watched with guarded eyes, uncertain if they were witnessing the rise of a new power dynamic or the seeds of something far darker. He arrived at his suite, dismissed the guards for the night, and sank onto a chair by the hearth. The room was quiet, the fire's embers glimmering. Outside the window, the sky was a sprawl of stars over the city. He rested his elbows on his knees, fingers laced together, recalling how it felt to stand in that throne room. Aerys's trembling signature had made everything real. The vow in the sept, now endorsed by the king, put blood behind the words. Allies at last. He let out a long breath and murmured to the empty room, "We'll see how this ends." Then, with heavy limbs, he rose, doffed his finery, and prepared for what rest he could find. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new eyes upon him, and the unpredictable presence of a king who might at any moment lash out with fire. But as he lay down, the flicker of hope remained, a faint flame in the darkness, sustained by the possibility that for once, the realm might find peace before war. Sleep took him. Deep in the Red Keep, Aerys Targaryen brooded in his private chambers. Rhaegar prayed for stability, and the realm held its breath. For better or worse, the Dragon Pact was forged, a bond between a proud stag and a fading dragon, and the Seven Kingdoms trembled on the cusp of a new era. A hush lingered in the corridors of the Red Keep long after the signing. Servants went about their tasks, whispering speculation whenever they thought no one of importance was listening. The hush was not one of peace, but of bated breath, like a collective intake of air before a plunge beneath uncertain waters. The Dragon Pact was official on parchment, the ink still fresh, the royal signature intact, yet the aftershocks of King Aerys's unpredictable appearance refused to settle. Early the next morning, Robert sat at a small table by the window in his chamber, a thin parchment spread before him. He was penning a letter to Storm's End, detailing the new arrangement to his castellan and advisors, but the words did not come easily. He had scrawled half a page and then scratched out nearly every line, frustrated by how to word it so his bannermen would understand. He wanted them to see this arrangement as a triumph, one that gave their house prestige and safeguarded the realm from a future of war. But part of him dreaded that some might accuse him of kneeling too low before a mad king. Still, the pact was done. Better to be clear and confident in his explanation. He dipped the quill again and tried. "We stand on the brink of a new chapter. House Baratheon is not subjugated, but recognized as a paramount ally of the crown, enjoying new rights and protections. The Targaryens, particularly Prince Rhaegar, aim for stability, which is likewise our aim. Watchfulness remains our shield, for the king's humors shift unpredictably. Yet we must accept good faith where it's offered. The future belongs to all of us who would see the realm united, not torn asunder by needless war." He paused, reading it over. It would have to do. He signed his name with a bold stroke, sealed the letter, and called for one of his knights to dispatch a raven. As the knight departed, Jon Arryn entered, gently shutting the door behind him. "You've been at that letter a while," Jon said, taking note of the scattered scraps Robert had abandoned. Well, I'm no master of flowery language," Robert muttered, pushing the scraps aside. "But our people need to hear about this before rumors twist it. It's done now. My messenger's on his way." Jon Arryn nodded, folding his hands behind his back. "Good. Word from the capital always seems different when it flows through 100 tongues first. Best to set the record straight." He studied Robert's face for a moment. "You look restless. Didn't sleep well?" Robert exhaled through his nose. "No. I keep thinking of the king's face when he signed the pact. Like a man caught between reluctant cooperation and the urge to lash out. I wonder if we've truly secured peace, or merely delayed the inevitable." Jon's voice was calm. "You've done what you can. The realm has seen you and Rhaegar join hands. The king's signature is on that document, even if he scowled through the process. That carries weight." Robert nodded. "I suppose so. Let's see if he tries to tear it apart the next time he's in a mood." "No, me." Jon Arryn offered a thin smile. "One step at a time." He cleared his throat, changing the subject. "Prince Rhaegar mentioned he'd like you to join him for a ride in the Kingswood today. A short hunt, perhaps. Some show of camaraderie." Robert ran a hand through his dark hair, which was still rumpled from sleep. "Hunting. Now that I can do. Who else will be there? Likely a small retinue, a few knights, maybe some guards. I doubt the king will come. They say he's locked away with his ravings again. This would just be Rhaegar's circle, plus you and me if we choose to attend. He wants to display that you're friends, not merely reluctant allies." Nekastar. Robert could appreciate that. He rose from his seat, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. "I'll go. The fresh air will do me good. I've been choking on city fumes for days." They agreed to prepare at once. Robert donned riding leathers in the colors of House Baratheon, his surcoat featuring a small golden stag on the breast. He strapped on a hunting knife and a belt quiver. Though the idea was a simple ride, he wanted to be ready in case they actually chanced upon game. Outside, the Red Keep courtyard was already astir with men readying the horses. Rhaegar stood near a pair of fine steeds, engaged in conversation with two Kingsguard, Sir Barristan Selmy and Sir Jonathan Derrytodd. When Robert approached, he caught the tail end of the prince's remarks. "Nothing too elaborate," Rhaegar was saying. "We don't want a large party scaring the game. Just enough men for safety." Sir Barristan inclined his head. "As you wish, my prince." Noticing Robert, Rhaegar turned with a welcoming smile. "My Lord Baratheon, good day. Ready to ride?" "Aye," Robert said. "I could use a break from these castle walls." Jon Arryn soon joined them, along with a handful of knights who were chosen to accompany the prince. They mounted up, the courtyard gates opening to let them pass into the city streets. The group moved briskly through King's Landing, winding past market stalls and cramped houses toward the gate that led to the Kingswood. Locals paused to watch, whispering when they recognized Rhaegar and Robert together. Two names that had once seemed destined for conflict, now riding side by side. A few small folk cheered, seeing a sign of unity in these uncertain times. Others simply gawked. Robert found himself squaring his shoulders a bit more, aware that every pair of eyes assessed them. Once beyond the city walls, they picked up the pace, the horses breaking into an easy canter down a well-trodden path. Autumn's touch was evident in the crispness of the air, and the scattering of leaves, just beginning to turn red and gold. The Kingswood spread out ahead, a swath of ancient oaks, elms and undergrowth, where royal hunts had taken place for generations. Robert inhaled deeply, catching scents of damp earth and decaying foliage. He felt more at home here, away from the palace bustle. Rhaegar rode at the head of the column, exchanging a few words with Sir Barristan. Robert remained a short distance behind, watching the interplay with mild curiosity. He knew Barristan was well regarded, an honorable knight, skilled in combat, a man who had served loyally for years. If Rhaegar trusted Barristan, that was another point in the prince's favor. As they entered the shadow of tall trees, Rhaegar slowed his mount until Robert drew even. "I'm pleased you came, my lord." The city grows stifling this time of year, especially with so much tension in the air. Robert nodded, glancing around the sun-dappled forest floor. "Aye, I spent my youth outdoors, not cooped up in a keep, so this suits me fine." He gestured at the overarching boughs. "Any particular quarry in mind, or shall we just wander?" Rhaegar patted the bow slung across his back. "Let's see what the day brings. Perhaps a boar or a few deer. I know the boars in the Kingswood can be fierce if cornered, so we'll keep a watchful eye." Robert cracked a grin. "Now you're speaking my language. A little danger keeps the blood pumping." Jon Arryn, riding nearby, gave a mild chuckle. "Try not to get yourself gored, Robert. The realm needs you alive." Robert's grin broadened. "I'll do my best, Jon." They ventured deeper, fanning out slightly in pairs. Knights kept an eye on the underbrush for signs of movement. Birds called overhead, and a hush of rustling leaves accompanied every horse's step. The sun filtering through the canopy cast shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Robert felt his tension ease, if only a fraction. The world out here seemed simpler, the petty politicking of King's Landing replaced by nature's rhythms. Rhaegar steered them along a meandering creek, dismounting at one point to kneel and examine a set of tracks. Robert joined him, crouching to see what the prince noticed. "Deer, I think," Rhaegar observed, brushing a hand over the damp soil. Robert nodded. "Fresh enough. If we follow them, we might have a chance." They signaled to the others, and the group advanced more quietly, leading their horses to minimize noise. Eventually, the trees opened onto a small clearing, strewn with wild grasses. In the distance, the gentle slope of a hillside rose, crowned with more woods. As they watched, a doe and her fawn stepped into the clearing, delicate heads lifting to sniff the breeze. Rhaegar raised his hand to halt the party, eyes intent. But Robert's gaze slid from the deer to Rhaegar. He didn't miss the subtle shift in the prince's posture, the hesitation in his eyes. Rhaegar had a bow, but he didn't knock an arrow. Instead, he stood still, watching the dew. After a few heartbeats, the creature flicked its ears, sensing them. With a rush of hooves, the doe and fawn bounded away, disappearing into thicker growth. Rhaegar lowered his hand, letting out a slow breath. "You could have had a shot," Robert murmured. "I know," Rhaegar said quietly, offering a half-smile. "But I find myself in no hurry to kill today. Perhaps I'm growing soft. Or perhaps my mind is too preoccupied." Robert considered that. We all have days like that. Ser Barristan approached, having circled around to catch the deer if it tried to escape. Seeing it gone, he inclined his head. "Another time, my prince." Rhaegar only nodded. They remounted and carried on, letting the gentle sway of the saddle and the forest stillness guide them deeper. Occasionally, they spied a squirrel darting across branches, or heard the distant cry of a hawk. Hours slipped by, and the sun rose higher, bathing the canopy in warm light. A small break in the underbrush revealed a glade with a babbling stream, perfect for watering the horses. They dismounted again, letting the animals drink as the group rested. Robert found a low boulder to sit on, leaning forward, forearms on his thighs. Rhaegar came to stand beside him, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. "Tell me, Robert," the prince said softly. "How are your bannermen reacting to this alliance? Any word from Storm's End yet?" Robert shook his head. "None since the signing. I sent a raven this morning. It'll take time for the message to arrive and for them to reply. But I know some of my lords have questions. They're fiercely loyal, but they've also clashed with Targaryens in the past. They won't all be quick to trust. I've tried to reassure them, but you can only do so much from a distance." "Monster wine." Rhaegar nodded. "I understand. As for the rest of the realm, I've begun writing letters to the major houses. The Martells, Tyrells, Tullys, even the Greyjoys. I seek their acknowledgement of the Pact. If they respond favorably, we can plan a grand council to confirm that the Seven Kingdoms stand together." "Bay." "A grand council," Robert echoed. "That's an ambitious step. Is the king on board?" A wry smile flickered across Rhaegar's features. "He doesn't oppose it yet. I haven't pressed the point too strongly. Father's mind is fragile, and I must approach each idea with caution. But if we gather enough lords to pledge their cooperation, it might soothe his fears and keep him from, well, from darker impulses." Robert's gaze dropped to the flowing water. He remembered Aerys's penetrating stare in the throne room, how the king had practically spat the word traitor. "Yes," he said quietly, "I hope so." They mounted again and rode deeper, the day passing in steady exploration of the Kingswood's trails. At times, small talk emerged. Robert and Rhaegar spoke of tournaments past, of weapons they favored, of childhood memories. Rhaegar shared that he had always been drawn to music and prophecy, even more than swordplay, though he'd trained dutifully in martial arts. Robert admitted his own love of the spear and warhammer, though he had neglected the finer points of reading philosophy or learning the harp. It surprised Robert how easily conversation flowed when they were away from the court's prying eyes. He found Rhaegar's manner calm, thoughtful, not prone to arrogance, and that, in turn, dampened some of Robert's lingering resentment. He recalled how, as a younger man, he'd scoffed at the idea of Rhaegar the Dreamer. But face to face, the prince possessed a quiet charisma that was hard to dislike. When the sun began its slow descent, they turned back toward King's Landing. The ride home was companionable, if subdued. At the city gates, they found a small crowd waiting, word having spread that the prince and Lord Baratheon were returning. Rhaegar inclined his head to the onlookers, and Robert managed a friendly grin. If it helped quell rumors of discord, he could play the smiling ally for a moment. Back inside the Red Keep, they parted ways. Rhaegar went to report to the small council, while Robert returned to his chambers. He removed his riding gear, washing the dust and sweat from his face. As he toweled off, one of his knights announced that Jon Arryn was waiting to speak with him. Robert, still in his shirt and breeches, stepped into the antechamber. Jon was there, looking pensive. A raven arrived from the north, from Eddard Stark, Jon said quietly. It was addressed to me, but I'm sure he expected I'd share it with you. Robert's eyebrows rose. Ned sent a letter. Good. What does he say about all this? Jon handed over the parchment. Robert read. I have heard rumors from travelers that a pact has been signed between Baratheon and Targaryen. News in Winterfell moves slowly, but I trust you and Robert have reasons for this. The North remembers well the threats uttered by the Mad King. Yet we do not hunger for war if it can be avoided. Are you certain the Targaryens can be trusted? The realm is uneasy. Tell Robert. I stand by him as always, but caution him to keep his eyes open. I will remain vigilant here. May the gods guide you both. It bore Ned's usual straightforwardness, neither condemnation nor blind acceptance. Simply a quiet loyalty blended with a healthy dose of caution. Robert felt a pang of relief, reading those words. He had worried the North might balk. Jon folded his arms. Stark's stance sounds supportive if guarded. Good news for us. Robert nodded. Ned's no fool. He'd rather see peace than war, but he also won't swallow any lies. I'll send a reply. Reassure him of what's going on. Jon Arryn agreed that would be wise, and departed to prepare fresh parchment. Robert lingered, thinking of Ned's letter. He pictured his friend up in Winterfell's cold halls, hearing wild rumors of the Dragon Pact. No doubt Ned was worried for Robert's safety, or feared that this was a forced arrangement. But at least they were still on amicable terms, a small victory in an ever-shifting realm. That evening, Robert joined Rhaegar, Jon Arryn, and a few others for a modest supper in a lesser hall. Conversation drifted between idle chat. Weather, the next tournaments, and more pressing concerns, like the tension in the Westerlands. Tywin Lannister had remained distant since the signing, offering no overt challenge but no lavish endorsement, either. He was an enigma, and Rhaegar seemed determined to placate him, or at least keep him from sowing discord. Halfway through the meal, Lord Varys appeared quietly, a courteous bow on his lips. Rhaegar beckoned him closer. Robert watched the man with that same mix of wariness and grudging respect. Varys had a way of surfacing precisely when he was needed. Forgive the interruption, my prince, Varys said in his silken tones. But I bear word from Dorne. A raven arrived with Prince Doran Martell's seal. Enter Domsol. Rhaegar wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. Speak. It seems Prince Doran is open to the notion of stability. He references your marriage to Alia of Dorne, and how that should tie Dorne to the crown. However, he expresses concern about the Mad King's unpredictability. He states that if House Targaryen is truly committed to peace, Dorne will not oppose this new alliance. Yet he wishes clear assurances that the Martells' influence will not be diminished by the Baratheon Pact. Robert cut a glance at Rhaegar. So he's worried I'll overshadow them? Rhaegar gave a pensive nod. Something like that. Dorne historically was, well, never conquered in the same manner as the other kingdoms. They value their autonomy, and the legacy of Princess Elia's marriage to me. Doran likely wants to ensure that Doran's special relationship with the crown remains intact. Varys spread his hands gently. I have no doubt, my prince, that with the right words Prince Doran can be reassured. The Martells do not see conflict, only respect. Robert found it interesting that even as Targaryen consort, the Martells felt nervous about House Baratheon stepping into a favored position. That, he supposed, was the nature of court politics. Every region jostled for advantage or feared losing what little they had. Shall I offer anything to ease their concerns? He asked. Rhaegar met Robert's gaze. Perhaps once we hold the Grand Council, we can present the Crown and Stormlands as equals among the other great houses, not as a new power block overshadowing the rest. If the Martells see that you come to the table seeking cooperation, that might soothe them. Robert shrugged. Fair enough. I don't hunger for more territory or power. I just want to ensure no blood spills needlessly. Varys inclined his head. Then I'll send a carefully worded reply to Prince Doran. noting House Baratheon's cordial intentions. At Rhaegar's nod, the Master of Whisperers slipped away, quiet as a cat. The meal continued, overshadowed by the swirl of new tidings. Each piece of news from far corners of the realm reinforced just how fragile their arrangement was. They needed every major house to accept, or at least not sabotage the alliance. Otherwise, the entire realm might fracture at the first sign of the king's madness. When supper ended, Rhaegar and Robert parted with polite bows. Robert left the hall, accompanied by Jon Arryn. Outside, a mild breeze rustled the torch flames in their sconces. The corridors felt colder at night, or perhaps it was the weight of uncertain alliances that chilled the air. Robert spoke in a low tone, mindful of servants passing in the distance. "We've taken steps, but I can't shake the feeling that something will snap. The Lannisters remain distant. The Martells need coddling. The king is teetering. Meanwhile, I'm betting the Stormland's future on Rhaegar's good sense." "Demtenesia." Jon Arryn placed a reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. "We do what we must. If the alternative is certain war, then this path, while dangerous, may still be the better one. Have faith in the alliances you're forging. And keep an eye on the king, yes, but also keep an eye on any who might exploit his madness. That includes Tywin, other lords who might resent your new influence, or even Rhaegar's rivals within the Targaryen family, if such exist." "Wow." Robert nodded grimly. "I'll keep all eyes open." They reached Robert's chambers, and Jon excused himself to retire. Robert stepped inside, found the space dimly lit by a single candle. A servant offered to stoke the fire, but Robert waved him off. He dropped heavily into a chair, letting the quiet envelop him. The flicker of the candle cast odd shadows on the walls, reminding him of dancing shapes in the Kingswood. Absent-mindedly, he fingered the hilt of his hunting knife, remembering the doe and her fawn. How Rhaegar had let them go. The prince's gentleness was at odds with the savage rumors swirling around King Aerys. A part of Robert wondered how the realm might fare if Rhaegar were king already. Could the realm truly unite under his leadership, free of his father's mania? But that was a dangerous thought, bordering on sedition if voiced aloud. He pushed it away, though it lingered at the edges of his mind. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most treacherous to act upon. Days passed. Letters flew between King's Landing and the major seats of power. Rhaegar and Robert busied themselves drafting appeals, reinforcing the idea that the Crown and the Stormlands were forging a new era of cooperation. Some lords responded politely, cautiously encouraging. Others wrote stiff acknowledgments that revealed nothing. A few, like the Greyjoys, made no reply at all, content to remain distant in their island strongholds. Meanwhile, King Aerys's appearances were erratic. Sometimes he would stalk the corridors, muttering about conspiracies. Other times he locked himself away, refusing to see even his queen. When the small council convened, Rhaegar presided, with Aerys absent. Tywin Lannister attended as a guest, still unreadable, though he asked pointed questions about the crown's finances and the projected costs of hosting a grand council. Robert stood by Rhaegar's side, adding his voice where it seemed beneficial. On the surface, all was orderly. Beneath, Robert suspected Tywin was taking careful notes, waiting for a chance to use them. One bright morning, a development arrived from across the narrow sea. A merchant vessel docked in King's Landing, bringing news that another Targaryen claimant, or pretender, had apparently surfaced in the Free Cities, whispering about his own right to the Iron Throne. The small council heard it from Varys in hushes. A man calling himself a Blackfyre Scion was stirring up interest among exiled knights. Rhaegar's face went stony when he heard. Robert noticed the flicker of fear in the prince's eyes. Fear that any Targaryen pretender, even if spurious, might incite trouble in Westeros. "That's the last thing we need," Rhaegar murmured. "If there's talk of a new Blackfyre, or any claimant with even a shred of Targaryen blood, it might sow confusion. Father's reaction could be catastrophic." Varys clasped his hands. "Precisely, my prince. My birds say it's not yet a large movement, more a rumor on the lips of sellswords. But we must be vigilant." Rhaegar pressed his lips together. I'll speak with Robert. If the Stormlands remain steadfast, that's one more anchor against foreign meddling, and we'll watch the ports carefully. Mentor. When Rhaegar found Robert in the training yard that afternoon, the Lord of Storm's End was mid-session with a practice warhammer. Swinging it at a wooden dummy, he grunted with each strike. Sweat gleamed on his brow. He found physical exertion a useful remedy to the frustrations of politics. At the sound of Rhaegar's approach, he paused, resting the hammer's head on the ground. "My prince," Robert said between breaths. "You look troubled." Rhaegar explained the new rumor, voice low enough that the other knights training nearby could not overhear. Robert's expression hardened. "Another pretender, eh? As if we don't have enough to worry about. Do you believe he's truly a Targaryen offshoot?" Rhaegar shrugged. "Likely not. The Blackfire line was snuffed out long ago. But if Sel's-words or discontent lords abroad rally to him, it could become a threat. I doubt it'll gain enough traction to threaten Westeros directly, but it might provoke father." Robert set the hammer aside, wiping his brow with a forearm. "Anything that unsettles your father is a risk. Let me know how I can help. The Stormlands won't side with some foreign adventurer. But we'll need to keep your father calm." Mr. Mott. Rhaegar's gratitude was evident in his eyes. "I appreciate that. I'm sure the small council will watch the ports, perhaps assign extra navy patrols. If father hears only that we're prepared, maybe he'll remain rational as he can." They walked from the yard into the keep, discussing the matter quietly. On the steps, they encountered Tywin Lannister, who nodded at them both with the faintest tilt of his head. The man rarely smiled. Robert wondered if Tywin had gotten wind of this supposed pretender as well. No doubt he had. Lannisters had their own sources. Tywin said nothing, merely observing them with cool, calculating eyes, and then continued on his way. That evening, a mild rain set in, pattering against the Red Keep's windows. Robert dined with Jon Arryn in a smaller private room, the pair of them exchanging the day's developments over a simple meal of roasted duck and small ale. The topic turned to the future Grand Council that Rhaegar wanted to host. An event that would gather the great houses to affirm the new alliance and address the realm's concerns. Robert was torn. Such a gathering might quell rumors or stoke them, depending on Aerys's conduct. Jon Arryn listened carefully, tapping a finger on the table. If the king attends, it could be precarious. If he does not attend, that might be seen as a slight. But if we proceed without him, people will believe Rhaegar is assuming more power than the king is comfortable with. "Damned if we do, damned if we don't," Robert grumbled. "But maybe it's the only way forward. If the realm sees all the major lords sitting together peacefully, maybe it'll overshadow any talk of pretenders from across the sea." "Naimnin." Jon nodded. "Let's hope so. We'll need Tywin's cooperation, and Dorne's, and the Starks, Tullys, Tyrells, Greyjoys, Arryns, all to attend. It'll be a grand spectacle if nothing else." Robert took a swallow of ale, savoring its faint bitterness. A spectacle indeed. In the days that followed, preparations slowly took shape. Messages were dispatched to the great lords, inviting them to a royal assembly in King's Landing within the coming moons. Prince Rhaegar couched it in language emphasizing unity, the forging of the realm's future, and the affirmation of the newly minted Dragon Pact. Queen Rhaella made occasional appearances, quietly lending her endorsement. As for King Aerys, he neither forbid nor encouraged the plan. One day he might rant about conspirators, the next he might mumble an indifferent acceptance. Robert directed letters to the Stormlands, ensuring his bannermen would accompany him. Though he advised them not to bring an excessive number of armed men, they would arrive in strength, but not so many as to provoke the crown's suspicion. Slowly, the realm's gears began to turn toward this planned gathering. One morning, a visitor arrived unexpectedly at the Red Keep. Brynden Tully, called the Blackfish, uncle to Lord Hoster Tully of River Run. He came on behalf of his family, bearing greetings and curious inquiries about the Pact. Rhaegar received him in the Solar, with Robert present. The Blackfish was a seasoned knight, keen-eyed and frank in manner. "We of House Tully wish to know what measure of stability we might truly expect," Brynden said, standing with arms crossed. "If the Stormlands are allied with the Crown, are we to assume the Riverlands remain a secondary piece on the board? Or will we have our say in this new arrangement? Rhaegar answered calmly. All houses will have their voices heard. This alliance does not place the Stormlands above the rest. Lord Baratheon stands with us to preserve unity, not to overshadow other lords. Robert dipped his head in agreement. I've got no designs to push the Tullys aside. All I want is a realm that doesn't bleed over petty squabbles or madness. Nemtran. The Blackfish studied them both, then gave a curt nod. I'll relay that to my lord brother. He's open to reason, but he'll need reassurances that the Targaryens truly seek equal cooperation. Rhaegar's gaze flicked toward a side window. Lord Tully will have an honored place at the Grand Council. I'll personally ensure he's recognized. Perhaps we can draft an agreement with the Riverlands regarding Trident. That seemed to mollify Brynden Tully. After exchanging further pleasantries, he took his leave, presumably to deliver the news back to River Run. Robert turned to Rhaegar. It never ends, does it? Every house wants a piece. Guess that's the price of peace, negotiating with each corner of the realm. Rhaegar's laugh was soft, lacking true mirth. It's a puzzle. But at least we're attempting to assemble it rather than break it apart. As weeks rolled on, more responses trickled in. The Tyrells wrote to say that Mace Tyrell would attend with a suitable retinue. The Greyjoys remained silent, as was their habit, though a lone raven arrived eventually, bearing a terse note that Lord Quellan Greyjoy would consider sending an envoy. The Arryns, of course, were represented by Jon Arryn himself. The Tullys and Martells both expressed conditional approval. The Lannisters, still in the city, gave no formal acceptance. Yet Tywin lingered, as though waiting to see how events unfolded. One gray afternoon, Robert took a walk atop the Red Keep's battlements, looking out toward Blackwater Bay. The wind whipped his cloak around his legs. From this vantage, he could see far across the city's sprawl. The rooftops, the winding streets, the docks teeming with ships. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries lost in the rush of wind. Jon Arryn found him there, pensive. Standing side by side, they surveyed the city. It's grown more crowded of late, Jon observed. Travelers from all over the realm are filtering in, anticipating the council. Even merchants hoping to profit from so many lords and ladies in one place. Robert sighed. I see them down there and wonder if they have any idea how close we came, or might still come, to war. The Targaryens remain precarious. Aerys' meltdown could destroy everything. Jon stared at the distant horizon. That's why Rhaegar is pressing forward with such determination. He knows if he stalls, something might unravel. If the Grand Council takes place before the king truly falls into madness, we might secure enough unity that no single house dare rise in rebellion. Aerys himself would be forced to follow the momentum, or risk losing face. Robert grunted agreement. I just hope it works. If it doesn't, he let the words trail off, but both men knew the end of that sentence. War, blood, and a realm in flames. The appointed time for the Grand Council drew near, signaled by the arrival of the first major delegations. Mace Tyrell rode in with pomp, accompanied by a retinue of knights clad in green and gold, bearing baskets of fresh flowers to be scattered on the ground, an ostentatious show typical of the Reach. The man himself was hardy, beaming, and carried a certain smugness. He was greeted by Rhaegar with cordial formality, while Robert observed from a short distance, wondering if the Tyrell lord took any of this seriously or merely saw it as another grand occasion to flaunt wealth. Following on their heels, a small party from the Vale appeared. Lady Anya Waynwood, representing her house, along with a handful of knights. They were not as flamboyant, but they carried themselves with the dignified gravity of the Vale. House Redford and House Royce also sent envoys. Robert noted each arrival, trying to gauge whether they approached the crown with optimism or dread. As the day of formal assembly approached, the Red Keep transformed into a maze of lords, ladies, knights, and attendants. Everywhere Robert looked, he saw new faces, heard new accents. Servants scurried with trays of food and drink, doing their best to accommodate the swelling number of guests. The corridors rang with the bustle of greetings, quiet negotiations, and speculation on the upcoming conference. Rhaegar worked tirelessly, meeting with each group in turn, doing his best to reassure them that House Targaryen had only the realm's best interests at heart. Robert accompanied him at times, though he often felt out of place amidst the swirling chatter. He was better at hammering problems than dancing around them with pleasantries. Still, his presence seemed to help, a visible sign that he and Rhaegar were of one mind. On the eve of the Grand Council, tension hung as thick as a storm cloud. A feast was held in the Great Hall, an event to welcome the High Lords and let them mingle before the official business began the next day. Musicians played lively tunes, and tables creaked under the weight of roasted meats, wines, and delicate pastries. Yet beneath the pageantry, caution ruled. Robert found himself seated near Mace Tyrell, who spoke at length about the bounty of Highgarden, how the roses had never been so vibrant, and how he looked forward to forging new trade links. Robert half listened, occasionally glancing down the table at Rhaegar, who was deep in conversation with Prince Doran Martell's emissary, a lean diplomat named Lord Corn. Nearby, Tywin Lannister remained silent, sipping wine with a face like chiseled marble. Jon Arryn leaned over to Robert. "We need to be mindful tomorrow that no one feels sidelined. The last thing we want is for any house to think the Crown and the Stormlands plan to dictate terms." "Metas and Nesar," Robert grunted. "Then we'll let them talk and talk, though I might go mad listening. But if that's what keeps the realm at peace, so be it." Across the hall, the seat reserved for King Aerys remained conspicuously empty. Occasionally, the hush would ripple through the crowd, as if they expected the king to burst in and unleash some new tirade. But he did not appear. Queen Rhaella attended, pale and subdued, offering only polite nods when addressed. The sense of precariousness grew. When the feast ended, the lords retired to their guest quarters, while Robert and Jon Arryn walked the torchlit halls back to their own chambers. The mood was taut. One could almost feel the prayers and silent pleas that tomorrow's council would steer the kingdom away from chaos. At dawn, a pale sun broke through thin clouds, illuminating the Red Keep with a diffused light. The Grand Council was to convene in the throne room, where space allowed for all the participants. Servants arranged rows of benches before the Iron Throne, while a long table stood near the dais, adorned with ink, quills, and parchment. Rhaegar wanted every lord to have the chance to speak, to propose suggestions for strengthening the realm's unity. At last, the hour arrived. Lords and their retinues filed into the throne room, the air thick with anticipation. Robert stood near the dais with Rhaegar, scanning the assembled throng. He noted the presence of each major house: Tully banners, Tyrell banners, Martell sigils. He glimpsed the Falcon of the Vale, the flayed man of the Boltons from the north, House Royce's runes, Waynwood's crossed keys, the red wine grapes, and more. It was a tapestry of heraldry and ambition. Tywin Lannister took a seat near the front, saying little, while Mace Tyrell made a show of greeting everyone within earshot. Across the aisle, the Martell emissary stood in quiet conversation with Brynden Tully. Tension thrummed under every polite smile. Then came the moment everyone had both dreaded and expected. The Mad King himself entered the throne room. Whispers passed among the crowd as Aerys strode unevenly to the Iron Throne, flanked by 2 Kingsguard. He wore grand robes of red and black, though his hair hung in disarray and his eyes gleamed with suspicion. Rhaegar bowed, face carefully neutral, and stepped aside to allow his father to ascend. Robert did the same, though he felt his pulse quicken. Aerys surveyed the room, face pale, fingers drumming on the throne's twisted armrest. "Lords of Westeros," Aerys began, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "You stand before your king. The crown has called you here to discuss the future. My son would have you believe we need unity, alliances." His gaze flicked to Rhaegar, then to Robert. A sneer curled his lips for just an instant. "Pact has been signed with House Baratheon. Fine. Let us see if the rest of you kneel or conspire." A ripple of discomfort passed through the hall. Rhaegar stepped forward politely. "Father, if I may." Aerys raised a hand, silencing him. "You may not. I am king." His gaze swung to the crowd, narrowing. "Yet I will allow this meeting to proceed. Let these lords speak. If they dare utter treason, well, The dragon's fire awaits. Dane. Rhaegar's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head in deference. The king gestured for him to speak, and so the prince addressed the assembly, outlining the reasons for the council. To ratify a commitment to peace, to expand on the alliance with House Baratheon, and to hear any grievances or proposals from other lords. Rhaegar's tone was measured, gracious, determined. But Robert sensed the tension in every word, the knowledge that Aerys might derail things at any moment. One by one, major lords or their envoys stepped up. Mace Tyrell offered flowery praise for the crown, and gently pressed for better trade routes and privileges for Highgarden. Prince Doran's representative reminded everyone that Dorne had stood with the Targaryens through Rhaegar's marriage to Elia, and asked for a reaffirmation of Doran's unique customs. Brynden Tully, speaking for Riverrun, expressed hope that this new era meant more equitable distribution of taxes along the Trident. Lord Royce from the Vale commented on the need for robust defenses at the Bloody Gate, asking the crown to allocate resources. One after another, voices rose, all couched in elaborate courtesy, each request a subtle test of the crown's will. Robert felt his shoulders tense as he watched. The king fidgeted, a scowl darkening his features whenever a request seemed too bold. Rhaegar interjected diplomatically, promising to review proposals. Jon Arryn offered reasoned commentary, bridging differences. Tywin Lannister remained silent until near the end, when he finally rose to speak. "Your Grace," Tywin said in that firm, resonant voice, "House Lannister seeks no conflict with the crown. We served once, and we stand willing to serve again, provided the realm's stability is genuine and not a fleeting fancy. If this new alliance with House Baratheon is to be more than words, let us see it reflected in just governance, fair taxation, and prudent stewardship of the royal coffers." His eyes flicked meaningfully at the king. "I trust the crown will not squander the realm's wealth on illusions." Aerys bristled. A hush fell, for no one missed the pointed jab. Yet the king merely glared, hands gripping the throne's metal edges. "Do you doubt our prudence, Lannister?" Aerys spat. "Speak plainly." Tywin inclined his head, face impassive. "I only observe that wise kings guard the treasury, paying their debts, and ensuring the realm's gold is not wasted. If you say that is your intent, your grace, then House Lannister is content." Aerys' lips twisted, but before he could speak further, Rhaegar intervened, addressing the hall again. "Let us move forward with unity. The crown commits to wise financial management. House Baratheon and House Targaryen have pledged to ensure peace. We invite each of you to confirm your loyalty publicly, then sign a revised charter reflecting our shared interests." The tension held for a moment. Then, as if guided by an unseen hand, the lords began moving toward the long table to sign their names or sigils on the prepared parchment. It was a statement of loyalty to the realm's new direction, not wholly binding in law, yet significant in front of so many witnesses. The king looked on, ill at ease, but said nothing to forbid them. Robert took a step forward, glancing at Rhaegar, who nodded. So Robert added his signature in bold strokes beside the Targaryen seal, reaffirming the alliance. One by one, the other major houses followed suit, though some did so with guarded expressions. When it was done, the hall erupted in polite applause. Rhaegar thanked them all, standing with quiet dignity near the dais. At first, Aerys joined the applause with a slow, mocking clap, but it died quickly. He rose, robes swirling, and looked down at the assembled lords. "You have all bent the knee in writing," Aerys declared in a harsh whisper that carried across the hush. "We shall see if your deeds match your vows. Should any house break faith, we shall see them burn." An uncomfortable stillness hung after his words, broken only by the swish of Aerys' robes as he stalked off the dais. The Kingsguard hurried after him. Rhaegar remained, shoulders taut, gazing at the parted crowd. Then, in a steady voice, Rhaegar addressed the lords. "I beg you forgive his grace Nanner. He's weary from the burden of rule. Let us not allow this moment to be tainted. We have taken an important step toward unity. I thank you all." With that, the formal session concluded. The lords dispersed in murmuring knots of conversation. Robert joined Rhaegar, along with Jon Arryn and a few others, near the dais. "Well," Robert said quietly, "that went about as well as we could hope. The king didn't throw anyone to the pyromancers." Rhaegar managed a small, rueful smile. "Indeed. It could have been worse. At least the realm has seen we stand together, and no house openly rebelled." Jon Arryn gave a measured nod. "A step forward. Now we see if the alliance is whole." Tywin Lannister approached, signing the charter with crisp efficiency, then turned to them. "Congratulations, my prince, my lord," he said in a neutral tone. "I trust you will do what's necessary to maintain order." His gaze flicked to Rhaegar, then to Robert. "Farewell. I shall remain in King's Landing a short while longer to observe developments." With that, he left, leaving only his words' faint echo behind. In the coming hours, talk of the council's outcome rippled through the city. The official stance was that the major houses had reaffirmed their loyalty to the crown and acknowledged the Dragon Pact as a cornerstone of the realm's peace. Publicly, it seemed a grand success. Banners fluttered, merchants cheered, wine flowed in the streets. Yet Robert felt in his bones that the real test lay ahead. For behind every lord's signature hovered personal ambitions, grudges, and caution. That evening, a smaller gathering took place in the Royal Solar, with Rhaegar, Robert, Jon Arryn, Varys, and a few trusted counselors. They reflected on the day's events. Rhaegar pressed his fingertips together, elbows on the table. "We've taken a major step. Yet Father's threat rang loud in the throne room. I fear some lords may go home feeling uneasy, or even resentful. Still, at least no open break occurred." "No." Robert leaned forward. "It's a start. We must keep building trust. Perhaps a progress through the realm, as you once mentioned, to show the crown and Baratheon traveling side by side. The Lord saw our pact today. Let the people see it too." Varys smiled his cat-like smile. "An excellent notion, my lord. Such displays can do wonders for public opinion. If the small folk witness your cooperation, it might quell rumors of the king's madness overshadowing everything." Bell. Jon Arryn tapped the table lightly. "But we must plan carefully. We can't leave the king too long in isolation, nor can we risk enraging him by taking too many soldiers on this progress. It's a delicate balance." Rhaegar nodded. "We'll plan it with caution. For now, let us rest. We have done enough for one day." They dispersed, each man carrying both relief and worry in his heart. As Robert returned to his chambers, he mulled over the subtle triumph they'd scored by holding the council without bloodshed, forging visible unity. Yet Aerys's presence lingered like a looming storm. Each success felt precarious, as though the realm stood on a narrow bridge over a pit of fire. In the solitude of his room, Robert let out a long breath. The Dragon Pact had been tested in public, and it survived. Tomorrow, a new round of negotiations might begin. Fresh demands from lords, cautious queries from foreign envoys. And behind it all, King Aerys perched on the edge of madness, capable of setting everything ablaze in a single paranoid fit. But for now, victory, however small, was theirs. He settled onto the edge of the bed, rubbing at the tension in his neck. Sleep would not come easily, not after the day's tension. Still, he allowed himself a moment of hope. The Grand Council was done. The realm's great houses had lent their signatures, and no swords were drawn in anger. In a land long accustomed to the thunder of conflict, that was no small thing. As he closed his eyes, echoes of the day's voices drifted through his thoughts. Lords pledging fealty, Aerys threatening betrayal, Rhaegar speaking calmly of unity. He recalled the slight tremor in the king's hand as he'd gripped the throne, the faint sweat on Rhaegar's brow as he guided the proceedings, the set of Tywin's jaw as he sized up the crown's finances. All of it was part of a tapestry still being woven. He thought, too, of Ned Stark's letter. Caution, tempered by loyalty. And he silently prayed that his friend in the north would not be forced to march south in a war for or against the dragons. Eventually, the weight of exhaustion forced Robert onto the bed, where he lay staring at the ceiling's shadows. Outside, the wind fluttered a tapestry in the corridor, like a distant heartbeat. In the city below, many drank and laughed, oblivious to how fragile their peace was. Robert found himself envying them. Then at last, he drifted into a restless slumber, haunted by half-formed dreams of stags and dragons locked together beneath a swirl of red sky. Come morning, he would rise to face whatever new challenges the realm served up. For that was the path he had chosen, forging a bond with House Targaryen in hopes of sparing the Seven Kingdoms a storm of blood. Whether that choice would lead to lasting peace, or simply delay a darker conflict, only the gods could say. But for now, they had taken a stride toward unity, and sometimes, in a land as tumultuous as Westeros, a single stride was all one could manage before the next tempest rolled in.